There's it. Good morning. I'm going to call this meeting to order now. We were just waiting for conversations to stop. I kind of listened to that. A couple board members that probably had some traffic issues, and we're trying to get our vice president connected online. He's traveling, but he's going to participate virtually. My name is Jane Dolan. I'm the president. That's why I called the meeting to order. And I will say that again. I call to order the Central LA Flood Protection Board meeting of July 28th, 2023. So welcome to everyone. You heard that the meeting is being recorded, so I wanted you to know that. Thank you to the folks who are here in the audience and those who are online. And you have let them all be here? Okay. Do we have any introductions to be made?
No introductions.
No introductions to be made. We have a very brief announcement. I don't know if I give it, Mr. Wright gives it, Mr. Leaf gives it. It's going to be a bit of a duplication. PL 8499 Rehabilitation Assistance for the San Joaquin River Basin has been opened for damages of January to May 2023 storms. And there'll be a lengthier presentation on that as an agenda item today. But we wanted to just keep saying that because that's good news and pretty rapid for the Corps. So thank you. So that's announcement. Any other announcements anyone wants to make here? All right, then we'll proceed, and I will ask our coordinator of board activities, Mr. Jones, to call the roll.
Board Member Ramirez. Here. Board Member Grego. Here. Board Member Countryman. Present. Board Member Bosler. Here. Secretary Johnson.
I'm here. Good morning.
Vice President Valines.
Present.
Yay.
President Dolan.
I'm here too. We heard your voice, Mr. Valines.
Good. Good morning, everyone.
Thanks for making that effort. A little break in your enjoyment of vacation. All members present, so that clearly allows a quorum. So we'll proceed. Our agenda does not look lengthy. Mr. Wright and I sort of do a little contest on when the board meeting will be over. I generally say 3 to 4 p.m. He generally says 1. So I think it'll be in between that. We'll see who buys the other person the beer. Erase that. So for our agenda, we'll have this review, which will be brief. We'll go to the minutes, which our Board Secretary Brian Johnson will present. We have 3 items on our consent agenda, 2 permits and 1 approval of a letter to the Army Corps to begin the 408 process. And I understand from Mr. Wright, these are all in order. And he's nodding yes. Thank you for that. Then we go to public comment. This is when I ask if anyone has a comment or something to say to the board for a matter that is not on the agenda, but is pertinent to what we do. And we will do not take action or discuss, but we do allow that. We will have a legislative update. Our executive officer has prepared and presented to us in writing the status of legislation before the California Assembly or Senate that is in some way pertinent to the board. And then I understand Mr. Young from the Army Corps of Engineers will provide us information on the Water Resources Development Act of 2014. I put 2014. I'm pretty sure that means 2024. And then we have inspection report from the inspection staff and our own staff of the Army Corps regarding Cache Creek Unit 1, Yolo Bypass Unit 2. And the Department of Water Resources had submitted a report covering their activities for the month of June, which we appreciate. We will have a presentation on the Delta Conveyance Project that will be information. We have 5 items under the what's called board items. 1 item is action and the other are information. Then we proceed to the executive officer's reports, which are just announced. We received them in writing, which we appreciate. Board comments, upcoming board meetings. There will be no closed sessions. I verified that with our council, who will probably join us in a bit. So I think that we'll do that. Please know that I will take breaks, but I don't exactly know when. But it won't be for the first half hour. Unless I want to, okay? So that's the rundown on the agenda. So we will move to minutes. Member Johnson, how's
Morning,
it
everyone.
going?
Good morning, everyone. This is approval of the minutes. You'll see that the agenda has two sets. Your packet had the April, but not the May minutes. That's because I held the May minutes to check on one thing. So I've reviewed the April 28 minutes and believe they're in order and move that they be approved.
All right. It will be one set today, and the motion has been made to approve the minutes for April 28th, 2023. Is there a second? Second by Griego, moved by our secretary. Anybody want to talk about the minutes of April? No hands up? No one here. All right, please call the roll.
Board Member Ramirez. Aye. Board Member Griego.
Yes.
Board Member Countryman.
Yes.
Board Member Bosler. Aye. Secretary Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Valines.
Aye.
President Dolan.
Aye, the ayes have it. But maybe not next time. The minutes are approved by unanimous vote. Thank you. We'll move to the consent items. I know I asked you something and you nodded, Mr. Wright. Do you have anything that you want to further add? He's shaking his head no. Okay. Three items. 5A is a permit number 19575, Stockton East Water District. This is basically replacement of a bridge. And if you want to know more, it's all written, but I'm not going to read it. 5B is a final statement of no objection for a permit application for a flood control project on Black Rascal Creek. This is a standard item. It is called a statement of no objection because that's the wording in the codes of the Army Corps of Engineers for us to say, we think this is appropriate to move forward in the 408 process. But that's shorter than, or longer than statement of objection. 5C is permit number 19702, Stanislaus County Public Works, also a bridge replacement project. So those are the three. They will be taken with one motion unless someone wishes to remove for discussion. I know the board does not. Anyone in the audience want to remove some of these to talk about it? Do we have any hands up?
No.
Okay, then we will proceed. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Move to approve.
Moved by Mr. Countryman. I'll second. Second by Member Griego. Please call the roll.
Board Member Ramirez. Aye. Board Member Griego.
Yes.
Board Member Countryman.
Yes.
Board Member Bosler. Aye. Secretary Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Valines.
Aye.
President Dolan.
Aye. I give up on the yes. All right. The consent agenda has been approved by unanimous vote of the board. Thank you all. Moving right along. This is item number 6 on the agenda. It's called public comment. It is not public comment associated agenda items. Is there anyone here in the audience who wishes to provide a comment or a statement to the board that is not on the agenda but does fit within our work? That's just, you're not waving your hand there, Liz. Thank you. Okay. Any hands up?
Yes, we have one from Richard Marcusen.
Mr. Marcusen, am I saying your name correctly? If I'm not, you get to speak anyway, so you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's actually Marcusen. I'm
Marcusen.
Richard.
Okay,
Marcusen,
I'll
yes.
get that right. Marcusen.
All right.
Good morning.
Next time, thank you. I live in the Pocket Greenhaven area, and I was quite frankly saddened and perplexed by the decision to issue multiple encroachment permits across the levee to allow private homeowners to install fences and to restrict public access across the levee. I've lived in the Pocket for over 35 years and frequently enjoy walking and biking. But my understanding was that after the latest rounds of repairs to the levee, that the city would pave the levee for all of the public to enjoy. So my question is, what is the board policy for private fences on the levee? Has the board discussed this with elected officials from the state, county, and city? Is the board in agreement that board staff continue to issue permits until the levee is chopped up into tens or hundreds of small segments with no public access at all? And why are homeowners in the North Pocket and Little Pocket area given this control over public property? I believe that the levee is a community resource, and the board's role, as articulated in numerous statements, is flood protection, not to protect a handful of property owners who are worried about incursions from surrounding communities. This is definitely something that the board needs to address, preferably with public hearings, opportunities for other elected officials to participate, and we need to have equal and complete access to the public property, which is a wonderful community asset to enjoy the Sacramento River. Thank you.
Mr. Markinson, thank you for your comments. I'm grateful that we record these proceedings, and so they will be transcribed. They will be presented to board and staff, and we will take action when things are noticed that we can. But your questions and comments are clearly heard, clearly noted, so thank you. Do we have any other hands up? Okay. Then we will proceed. Item number 7 is legislative update. Executive Officer Leaf, do you want to describe what you gave to us?
We provided a written report on status of California legislation that's still active, and as well a short description of federal items of note. And I believe the Corps has a representative that wants to expound on some items.
Okay. Good morning. Our board council has arrived. Good morning, Mr. Dua. Happy to see you.
Good morning,
Know
everyone.
about traffic.
Just for the
board members
record, I
have
was
any
following the meeting online until I could get here.
Oh, I know that you do that, so thank you.
Thank you.
He just said he's followed it online as he was driving here. So board members have any questions on the report that we received, the report on legislation? Thank you for putting that together with status and all that. That was great. Anyone in the audience? Any hands up?
We have Felix Young, from the Army Corps.
Okay. You're next. Okay. Well, that takes care of what our executive officers provided to us. Mr. Young?
Good morning, President Dolan. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I understand you have some WRDA information for us.
That's correct. So good morning to you again, President Dolan, members of the board, and my colleagues. I am Felix Young, Program Manager for Strategic Planning and Alignment at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Sacramento District. I'm speaking today on behalf of my agency to amplify a public notice for an annual process that's very important to the administration, to Congress, to the Army Corps, and to the public that we serve. And President Dolan, the information you have in your hands is indeed correct. We are talking about the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2014 that 9 years ago established this process, now commonly known as Section 7001, that requires the Secretary of the Army to submit an annual report. Among other things, it allows our non-federal partners to propose new feasibility studies or modifications to existing water resources projects or studies. Non-federal partners can also propose modifications to environmental infrastructure authorities that meet specific criteria. Now, the process has been open for a few months now, the Section 7001 process, and as of today, we have exactly 1 month remaining for non-federal partners to participate in this process and send forth their proposals. The Army Corps strongly believes that the effectiveness, accuracy, and success of these Section 7001 submissions come from collaboration between the proponents of these proposals and our office. So we're using this opportunity in front of the board not only to encourage our partners to participate, but to also get in touch with our agency to discuss these proposals as soon as possible that could address existing and future water resources project needs. There are two ways to jump into this process. First, there will be one more public information session on Wednesday, August 2nd, from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Pacific time, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Pacific time. I know that your board packet may not include the link, and some of our attendees are listening to this. So here's what I'll encourage you to do. Just do an online search for Army Corps Section 7001 online, and the first result should take you to our headquarters page with all the details about the program, including this upcoming public information session. Alternatively, you can also feel free to get in touch with me or the Sacramento District Office. We have a strong team of planners and leaders who can speak with your organizations about your proposals and help you navigate the process. So thank you again for this opportunity to speak with you about this very important annual procedure, and we look forward to partnering with you to discover what some of these existing and future needs are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Non-federal sponsor is, of course, the flood board.
Correct. The flood board, anybody from the state, from the flood board to DWR to down to the local government level, local districts, reclamation districts, flood control districts, municipalities, any state and local entity can get in touch with us to work on this Section 7001 process. It's open to all public state and locals. And it's not just for flood studies.
Thank you for that. I think that we would like to meet with you.
Member Bosler.
Oh, thank you for that. Member Bosler.
I was just wondering if I could ask board staff what the status of any project submissions are from the board.
Do we have any indication of something that we would like to submit? Mr. Salazar. Good morning.
Hello, there you go. Mike Salazzo, board staff, flood system improvement branch. To my knowledge, we don't have any new studies that we are tracking within this Section 7001 process. We do have some ongoing projects and feasibility studies we have expressed support in the past. So we're looking to make sure those are continuing on into the phases of authorization.
Well, we have a month opportunity to look to see what we would like to do. A lot of need out there. Did that answer your question, Member Bosler? Member Ramirez.
Thank you. I wanted to read something that was sent to me by Julie Retner, who's our Mid-San Joaquin regional lead, the RMP, and it's related to one of the existing authorities for feasibility studies on the Tuolumne River. It's a very old authority, goes back to 1997. And last year we sent a 7001 letter under this same program. And as far as I'm aware, nothing happened after we sent the letter. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. This is a little bit of a non-traditional study. It's not leading to construction necessarily immediately. There was a recon study done right after the 97 flood, and we got stuck at feasibility. And we've been trying to bring this back for lots of good reasons. And so I'm going to read what Julie asked to be read into the record. She couldn't be here today, but she knew this was going to be on the agenda, and she wanted me to share this, and then hopefully we can follow up with her and also with our friends at the Corps, and also anybody else that needs to be involved in it. So here we go. Since 2010, Stanislaus County, City of Modesto, reclamation districts downstream of Modesto, like RD 2092, and the Turlock and Modesto irrigation districts have worked in partnership with DWR and the Flood Board to develop a vision for a flood-safe region. We've implemented many projects on our priorities list, but one of our highest priorities for flood safety, widening the Tuolumne River corridor to reduce flood risk in Modesto and provide greater operational flexibility for TID at Don Pedro Dam, has progressed slowly. Through his water resilience portfolio, Governor Newsom asked that the stakeholders in the San Joaquin Valley develop a climate strategy for flood risk reduction. Widening the Tuolumne River corridor below Don Pedro was identified as a high priority by a large group of stakeholders in recent years. This historic winter and spring 2023, like the Tuolumne River saw over 3 months of sustained river flows, just inches below flood stage to Modesto. We understand that the dam operators worked with the Corps of Engineers to secure variances from their operation rules to effectively manage the deluge with integration of state-of-the-art storm and runoff forecasting. They certainly avoided flood catastrophe through these data-driven actions. Feasibility study, as requested, is not only broadly supported and long overdue for the Lower Tuolumne corridor, but could also empower the city, county, and state and federal land management agencies working downstream of Don Pedro to envision and deliver a more predictable and climate resilient river corridor that provides the co-benefits of restored ecology and wildlife populations and improved public access to open space and parks, like the new Dos Rios Ranch State Park. The stakeholders of the Mid-San Joaquin Regional Flood Management Plan are strongly supportive of the proposal to complete a feasibility study to examine federal interest and support for the infrastructure and ecosystem improvements that are needed to make the Lower Tuolumne River corridor safe in face of a changing climate, and to optimize the operations of Don Pedro Dam for the benefit of water supply for the region. So that's what she asked me to read. I just wanted to share that, and maybe we can follow up with our staff and the Mid-San Joaquin group and anybody else. And I'm hoping it's on our radar to submit a letter again this year. And then sending a letter is fine, but that's not the only thing we need to do. I want to make sure we get together and talk about not just the federal funding, but also the non-federal funding that the state would provide to match. So thank you for letting me share that.
Well, thank you for bringing that forward. I can see you don't have paper in front of you the way I do because I'm a troglodyte. But if you could send that statement to our executive officer so it's distributed to appropriate staff.
Yes, I will do that. I have an email. I don't have it on paper either, but I will forward it to the executive officer.
Thanks for someone else for having paper here. All right.
Could I respond? Just
Yes, you may, and then member Countryman.
before,
Mr.
I just wanted to note that board staff has sent a collection of about 6 or 7 letters of support to the Army Corps regarding several projects and studies, and this Tuolumne River study was part of that package. And so we do encourage, working with the Army Corps and to obtain funding for moving that into the feasibility stage.
When you say letters have been sent, would this be prior to now, or are they being sent again? Sometimes you need to put them at the top again.
Right. So it was sent, I want to say, back in April or March of this year as part of the congressional, can't quite get the right phrasing of it, but the congressional work plan funding package for that year. Yeah.
Okay.
And
My view might be naive is to just keep sending these kinds of informations and requests at any venue that is possible. We're part of the United States, so I know there's going to be a lot more requests than just what we want here, even though ours are most important. Member Countryman.
Just, it's not on the agenda exactly, but I participated in a study of San Joaquin flood project back in the 1990s, and the single most effective project for the entire San Joaquin Basin was this Tuolumne River reoperation of New Don Pedro. Relatively very low cost and with very high benefits. And if there's anything I can do to help support this project going forward, I'll certainly be all in on it. Thanks.
Sounds right on point. We talk. Member Bosler.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me, since we're we have the opportunity to be the non-federal sponsor and or support other projects that are consistent with the plan. It seems to me like it would be really great if we could use these opportunities to continue to advocate, even if we didn't get a response a year ago, still a good project, still something that we'd like to pursue. And so when these opportunities come up where the Army Corps is clearly asking us to put projects forward for feasibilities, that we have a list and that gets reported to us so we can kind of understand that. And then also a status column so that we understand the Army Corps is ignoring this project right now because of what? Like, what's the barrier? Like, what do we need to, how do we keep moving the ball forward? Because one thing when I was reviewing the agenda is, gosh, I just wish it was longer. I wish there were more projects coming before us for permits. It doesn't feel like, there's enough going on right now. Just a broad statement.
I like that. You said there doesn't seem to be enough going on right now. There certainly was a lot of emergency response to things that were critical and long known that would happen when we had our storm in January, February, March. And so now the sun is out, and it's really out in where I live. So it's kind of like, okay, it's over. It's not over. It's now starting. There are things that need to be done so that we can address life safety, infrastructure safety, and improve the environment. And what we learned happened this year certainly would be a template for what needs to be done, which we've known. It's in the plan. All right, that's my preach for today. Member Johnson.
Thank you, President Dolan. I wanted to thank Julie, if she's listening, for submitting that. I suspect maybe she's not, but she'll.
She is.
I'll thank her separately and co-sign and second what board members Countryman and Bosler said. And I would encourage you, each of you, to share the letters that have been submitted as situational awareness for us, and to keep us updated on your efforts to help advance those, whether they're ours or other partners that we support, and to let us know how we can help and bring that back in this public forum in a way that we can all be working together to advance the things that we're promoting. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other board member? Member Grego?
Yeah, and I just want to, I'm really happy to hear the discussion that we have today on this item. But I also want to note this as a advocacy item so that when we have the opportunity to talk about projects and hearing what Joe Countryman had to say about it, it's a high priority item. So when we advocate either for funding, policy, or projects, whether it be for the, another state agency or the federal government, that this particular project is mentioned.
The transcript doesn't show a lot of members and others nodding yes. And I'm sitting next to the executive officers who make me these notes, so we'll follow up on that. Mr. Zlazo?
Just one final comment is that I'm sure that Felix Young can correct me if I'm wrong, but the WARDA 2014 Section 7001 process is for entities to support projects that have not been authorized. And a lot of the projects and studies that we are advocating for have been authorized. They're just waiting for the appropriations process.
Mr. Young, I see your hand, but not you. You're up. Is he unmuted?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mr. Young, you have more comments for us, please? Are we having technical difficulties? I wouldn't know.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can.
Great. President Dolan and members of the board, thank you for one more opportunity to kind of lay out the context a little bit further here. So first of all, to go to Mike's most recent comment, the Section 7001 process is for proposing new study authorities, but also to modify existing authorities, existing projects and study authorities as well. But the most important thing I also want to say in light of this Tuolumne discussion is that the Tuolumne study was actually evaluated, I think, 2 years ago, and we found that the authority already exists. So there's no need for the Tuolumne study to go through the Section 7001 process again. Now, what board staff refer to in terms of these letters, these what we call letters of intent, is for the budgeting process, which is separate. So this is a case where Tuolumne already has the study authority and is just competing for the limited federal dollars that the administration provides, the Congress provides every year to carry out studies, including new studies, studies like Tuolumne. So what we are absolutely open to doing with board member Ramirez and Julie and other partners is to continue to have conversations about how we can strengthen the technical recommendation from the district up the vertical team to headquarters and the assistant secretary's office to make the case for the Tuolumne study. But again, recognizing that there are always limited federal dollars. The investigations account that Congress provides is not the biggest account among all the core funding categories. So there's always going to be some level of competition. But like I said, we'll be more than happy to continue this conversation to determine how we can strengthen the recommendation going upwards. Now, the final thing I'd also like to say is if we determine that the existing authority does not meet the needs of the partners today as they have identified it, that's where we can potentially use the Section 7001 process to modify the existing authority so that it can do what it needs to do. Again, that's a conversation we are more than happy to have. I just want to finally close by saying that we have not ignored the Tuolumne request. We know it has been a major priority for the board. Board member Ramirez has been very generous in giving us his time and his insights to help us understand why it is so important. And we definitely have not ignored it. It's just a matter of budgeting limits. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them now.
Well, we're certainly aware of budget limits and budget advocacy that's necessary. So I will ask our executive officer to organize that meeting. And thank you for that offer, Mr. Young. We'll do that. Member Ramirez will be there, of course.
I will. Thank you, Felix, for that. I appreciate it. And I understand, and we may or may not need to modify the authority, but that's part of the discussion I think we want to have. So I look forward to doing that. In the grand scheme of things, this is minor in the budget. We're talking about $1.5 million. This is not hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's a really small investment, which might have a lot of real benefit. That's just the federal money. We have to find the non-federal money also, which I think the state is interested in, I hope, providing. So I understand there's a lot of people asking, but this is a pretty small ask for a pretty big river that might have pretty big benefits. So we'll follow up. But thank you for your comments. I appreciate it.
And thank you for your feedback as well. I appreciate it.
Member Countryman will be involved as well. Member Countryman.
Just one other thing that needs to be considered as this goes forward is the Corps has funded redoing the flood manuals for, I guess, all of the reservoirs in California. And this would require a revision of the new Don Pedro flood operation rule curve. So it might be able to use some of that money along with this other study to make this thing happen. Just to point that out.
Sounds like it will be a good meeting, cooperation and strategy. Thank you. Any other board members on this? Any hands up? Every once in a while, someone does this, so I'm not sure if you want me to call on you, so I wait. I don't see any hands up here. Any online? Okay, that was great. Thank you, Mr. Young. Thank you, Mr. Leaf, for putting that together. I've been sharing it. It's great. Okay, legislative update. Are we ready to go to item 8? Did you have more? Okay. You can drop your mic. Item 8, United States Army Corps of Engineers will present an inspection report, and it will be introduced by Eric Mao of the Operations Branch of our staff. Good morning. Sorry about that. I can hear you, but that I can hear you in the room doesn't mean everyone else can. So
Right.
let's
It
try
should
again.
be on now. Thank you. So
Thank you.
I'll try again. Good morning, President Dolan, President Villines, and members of the board. My name is Eric Mao, and I would like to introduce Mr. Ryan Larson from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, or USACE. Ryan is the chief of the Levee and Channels Branch at the Sacramento District, and he will give a presentation on his team's inspection, finding of the Cache Creek Unit 1, Yolo Bypass Unit 2, Knights Landing Unit 1 levee system. After the USACE presentation, I will provide board's analysis regarding the inspection. And after my presentation, if there are any additional questions, several engineers from our local maintaining agencies are present. This includes Mr. Casey Lund from the Department of Water Resource Flood Maintenance Office, and Ms. Megan Nagy, who represents the Knights Landing Ridge Drainage District. So with that, I will turn it over to Ryan for his presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Larson.
Good morning, President Dolan, members of the board. Ryan Larson, Chief of the Levees and Channels Branch in our Operations Division at the Corps of Engineers. Typically, one of my sections, the inspection section, Juan Gonzalez gives these presentations. We're in the summer season, and he can't be here, so I'm happy to give this presentation on his behalf. And so here we go. This is the Cache Creek Unit 1, Yolo Bypass Unit 2, Knights Landing Unit 1 levee system. Just rolls right off the tongue there. All right. Next slide. Do I do that or? Okay. So a map of this levee, south of Knights Landing, north of the city of Woodland, along Cache Creek is the orange line there, Knights Landing Ridge Cut, the green line, and the magenta pinkish line is the west levee of the Yolo Bypass. The levee system is roughly 20 miles long. Report card for this levee system. There are unacceptable issues and encroachments, erosion bank caving, sod cover, settlement, and cracking. And we'll cover each of those. We'll cover examples of those here in the next slide. This levee system is inactive in the rehabilitation program. There is a letter of intent that has been submitted to the Corps of Engineers, and I can tell you that letter of intent is at headquarters right now in the review process.
Been there for a while.
No, less than a month.
Oh, wow.
So less than a month. So we're still within that ballpark of timeline there.
Okay.
At their office. All right. And so I've got a couple of pictures of examples of things here. So this first picture, number 1 in the upper left-hand corner, cracking near the lower landside toe. Cracks are 32 to 42 inches deep. Extends for approximately 100 feet in that upper left-hand picture. Upper right-hand photo, steel pipes through the levee, 3 feet below the crown. One of the pipes is open on the land side. And no inspection records of the pipes through the levee there. So the concern that water would be able to move from water side to land side. Lower left-hand picture, this is erosion underneath a bridge or near a bridge abutment. So, you know, if I could give you the perspective there, there's a bridge pier in the background, and there is shade being provided above the photographer there, and that's approximately 2 feet deep, that erosion underneath the bridge. And the last photo in the lower right-hand corner, that is a picture of a depression and rut, or a depression that could pond water. That depression is approximately 2 feet deep and 6 feet long along the levee. So these are the, we talk about dimensions of things, and when things get to be 2 feet into the levee prism, that's when we go, oh man, let's get that thing fixed. So so there's some dimensions there, some objective criteria that are leading to our inspection, observation, and rating. Pending any questions, that's all I have for you right now.
Your chart showed that the sod wasn't adequate. What are you talking about?
So sod cover, here
Yeah.
we are looking for surface protection. We're looking for the ability for the levee to withstand water falling from the sky during a rain event. And so there is some sort of, there's rilling or some sort of depression there that would be susceptible to surface erosion or water falling from the sky. I don't have a photo of it, no, because it's not going to be compelling. It's not going to be interesting to you. Unacceptable, yes. So there's, yeah. So back to that sort of the conversation of the criteria there. There was something, some observation, likely with a 2-foot dimension associated to it with it, that is causing that that red. Yeah. We try to give you examples of things here in these photos that are interesting or at least justify what we're saying. The sod cover photo didn't make the cut as something that would be compelling. Yeah. Understand. But we do need the levees to have some sort of protection against erosion. So that is how we are. That is what that category means. Okay. Thank you.
My calendar here. No criticism, because we certainly appreciate our partnership and the effort of the Army Corps. But the letter of intent was submitted July 2022, so it took a year to get to. I guess it went by Pony Express to get to Washington, D.C. That was snarky, I apologize. Mr. Mao.
I think Eric Mao, I think the board members had questions first.
You're absolutely correct, and I should look and provide for.
Well, I actually, my question is for DWR, who's one of the maintaining agencies of the system, and obviously we have
Someone's going to write some remarks.
oh, good. Great, wonderful. Then I will refrain.
Sure.
Let's go with presentations on this and questions. Mr. Mao, thank you.
Yes, thank you, President Dolan. Yes, after my quick presentation, we'll have the LMAs to speak on or answer any questions as well.
And Mr. Lund from DWR.
Correct, Mr. Lund and Ms. Miganagi. Mr. Lund is on virtually, so we might need to unmute him when that time comes. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Eric Mao, board staff, and I will be sharing some findings based on the inspection information provided by USACE. First, we have here more of a vicinity map of the levee location. As Mr. Larson mentioned, the levee system is about 5 miles north of the city of Woodland, south of Knights Landing. This system is in Yolo County, which I reside, wonderful county, and is a total about 19.6 miles. The USACE report card rated the system as inactive under PL 8499. As President Dolan mentioned, we submitted this in late July 2022. Took a bit of a time, but we're thankful that it's now at the headquarters as of July of 2023. So that was, to be fair, that was a period where we sent a lot of letter of intents. Every month we had 2 or 3, and the Corps tried to prioritize. We worked with the Corps to prioritize which ones we kind of wanted to go first in terms of how long they've been in the queue. So next slide here, more of a close-up, similar to Mr. Larson's presentation. You have the Knights Landing Ridge Cut Unit 1 right bank in the blue, Yolo Bypass West Levee Unit 2 in the green, and then the one in red, Cache Creek Unit 1 left bank. So the 4 items, 2 of them were in the blue levee segment and 2 of them were in the red levee segment. Next slide is just for clarification. I like to keep this slide just to show that when a report card is shown and it shows the yellow and the red, that means the levee system is inactive. It may have an LOI, but it's still inactive unless the headquarters has approved it, formally approved it. And then sometimes you'll see the purple and the orange. That shows that a levee system is active and has an approved letter of intent. So it's just to help differentiate. So this is the report card that Mr. Larson showed. Encroachments, settlement, sod cover, and a couple areas that are unacceptable. Okay, and so this next slide is going to be a comparison chart from the 2012 inspection to the recent 2021 inspection. Okay, and so green represents an improvement in the rating. So that's the green, and then pink shows a worsened condition from the previous inspection. Okay, sorry here. As you can see, there has been improvements in the flood fight preparedness, slope stability, animal control, vegetation growth, and seepage. In one of our segments, the sod cover and settlement did get worse compared to previous inspections, but huge improvement. I would like to open it now for questions. Again, Casey from DWR and Megan from Knights Landing Ridge Drainage District is present, and I'll turn that time over to that.
I would suggest that we begin with Mr. Lund and then Ms. Nagy.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm talking too fast. Thank you for giggling. Casey Lund, I understand you want to give us some information.
Yes, so can everybody hear me? Just for clarity.
I believe we can. Lots of nods.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Casey Lund, so I'm the superintendent for the flood maintenance office for the Sacramento Maintenance Yard. I guess thank you for hearing me. So there's 2 unidentified, or not identified, but the U ratings for the 2 pictures that were shown. So I could address them both individually. One of them is a picture of 2 pipes, the 3 feet below. Those are an approved encroachment for Payne Farms. And so I'm going to be working with the board to help resolve those issues, those violations. Obviously, one of the pipes is damaged, but the encroachment's only for 1 pipe. So I'll be working with the board to help with that violation, to have that repaired. The erosion that's located under Highway 113 crossing, that is also an encroachment issue. Yes, there's erosion up by the bridge embankment footing, which was identified. That erosion is caused by erosion from the encroachment. So there's water coming off of the bridge that's not being addressed by Caltrans. And so I will work with the board as well, so that way we can work with Caltrans and get that encroachment at least fixed, so no future erosion will happen, and then that way a repair can be made. As for the sod coverings, we do routine maintenance in the area. So we burn the area, we drag the area, we mow the area. So I'm kind of complexed over that particular rating. Maybe the inspection was done after we burnt the area. I'm sod covering is one of those things we do remove in the burning operations. So we did just complete all that. So that may be where that's coming from. I'm kind of complexed over that. Over.
Mr. Lund, thank you for that information. Any questions for Mr. Lund? I don't see that.
Can I
So,
just,
oh,
I'll just make a general
Mr.
statement
Larson.
here in response to that. There is an observation in there. that speaks to the unacceptable red thing that the inspectors found. Generally speaking, Casey, what you mentioned of burning the levee and managing the vegetation on the levee, that is fine. That's good. Do those things. There is something in there related to surface protection of the levee that is that is causing that red unacceptable. And so just look into it. It's likely at one location or one site. Okay.
This is Casey to respond to that. I'm happy to do so. Is there any possible way maybe the inspector can contact me? I'd be happy to address that individually. I'd like to know what that site is. That seems to be a something that's a concern to mine since it's an unknown.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just for everyone, a draft of this report did go over to the board at around the beginning of the calendar year, and we did get some comments back from DWR on things. So, Casey, please take a look at that report. But I'm confident that someone in your organization has seen it up till now, and you now have access to it now that it's finalized, and it should have GPS coordinates with the location, levee mile, pictures of the site.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. I didn't know you want to keep talking, Mr. Lenz. I'm going to watch the online there, but I'm going to call Member Countryman. Member Countryman, did you want?
Ryan said what I wanted.
Okay. Ryan
Usually
did that.
they show the levee mile with opportunity.
Okay. So there's a little more review of that inspection report that will be done.
Levee mile, GPS coordinates, photos to try to get the inspector back to the location that we observed. And then absolutely, if there's any questions at all, please contact Eric, and then Eric will get in touch with us about next steps or what to do, or if there's any questions about that. Thanks.
All right. Hands up from my board. Megan Nagy.
Wow. He is a lot taller than me. Good morning, President Dolan, members of the board.
Good morning.
Megan Nagy, Deputy Manager for the Knights Landing Ridge Drainage District. I'm going to steal some of Eric's slides for this. But so as you can see from our levee segment, we did have significant improvement over the last inspection. So, I just want to acknowledge that in DWR too, right? There's improvement over the last one. But going back to this slide, the two items that Ryan mentioned were cracking and depressions in rutting. Based on the report findings here, depressions in rutting is actually minimally acceptable overall. So that tells me that was probably one isolated location that had unacceptable. We've gone out, it looks like a tree fell over, and it's a depression from that. We would classify it more as erosion pocket than depressions, whatever. That's one half dozen to the other. We acknowledge it's there and it needs to be addressed. So, and erosion is an unacceptable red on this list. And that's really what I wanted to hone in on. The district recognized, and this is both sides of the ridge cut, that we do have erosion at the toe of the waterside bank on both sides. Back in the day, the Knights Landing Ridge Cut had a waterside maintenance berm on both sides. Our trustee or our commissioners that have been there, for a very long time said we used to be able to drive down that part. DWR maintains the ridge cut itself. We maintain the levees. Over time, that maintenance road is gone, and now it's in the levee prism. And so 2 years ago, my board stepped up and asked us to do a programmatic CEQA document for erosion. So we've adopted that about a year ago. We have a programmatic CEQA document for erosion projects on both sides of the ridge cut. We have programmatic cultural resources report. The Yolo County has an HCP and CCP in this location that we have gone through all the hoops to be able to gain access to. We did our first erosion project last year on the opposite bank. We got permitting for 4,000 feet. We constructed about 2,000 feet. We were hoping to be able to do the rest of the 2,000 feet that's already permitted this year. Unfortunately, high water has complicated that a bit, so we're not going to do it this year. We've also been not successful in getting any kind of grant to help us with that project. And so right now on the flood system, the FSRP list, these areas are listed as either areas of concern or serious. They're not listed as critical, even though the Corps has them as unacceptable red. So we're in a conundrum as far as how to get funding to help us. And for some perspective, our mitigation for last year and what we've already negotiated for the next 2,000 feet is about $100,000 every 2,000 feet. Last year, it cost us about $70,000 to do the construction and $100,000 to do the mitigation. We're going to continue to seek grant funding, but right now, my board has approved me to do this last 2,000 feet next year. Even if we don't get any more grants, we have enough money to do that last 2,000 feet. But then because of the cost, we're stuck and we have to stop. So we need help. We know this is an issue. We've done our part to try to take steps to advance this, but we're between a rock and a hard place to continue to keep going. And there's several thousand feet of erosion on both sides of this levee system. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer your questions.
I don't have any question. I'm just sad that we haven't found the money to do this. Thank you for being here to provide that. Member Bosley.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Megan for her clarity and the issue there, so thanks.
Yes, thanks for saying that. And you can see the nods. We appreciate when the local partners come virtually or particularly for me in person to do that. It's a hard road to go. We need to be on your side. We try to be. Thanks.
Just want to
Mr.
say
Larson.
thank you for the opportunity to talk about the individual levee system here and get some perspective like that from the local maintaining agency. Just part of the process to make sure that sponsors are aware of the unique issues out there and then try to find ways to make the levees better, make the levees stronger. So appreciate it. Thanks. We
will keep communicating. We certainly appreciate your assistance and information, Mr. Larson.
All right. Board
Mr.
staff.
Mao, you're going to close this off?
I'm
Or
going to close it off. Board member
maybe.
Eric Mao, board staff. I think President Dolan and board member Bosler said it all. I do always want to close just thanking our LMA partners who work so hard to maintain our levees, to show up, to provide access so the Corps can do their inspections, and also the Corps team for all their hard work and the labor it takes to build those reports. So.
Member Countryman and Member Grego. See, they're not closing up. They are.
I just an observation that when Megan was a Corps of Engineers employee and she came here and made these presentations and started showing us photographs of the problems is when we started to really make some progress because it brought a paper thing into reality. Mm-hmm. So I think the process has helped a lot to improve the whole system, and I just hope we can get the funding necessary to, get everything done properly. But it was kind of hard at first. We were a little resistant, I'd have to say, but with the photographs and everything, it really helped the board understand the problems out there. So we appreciate that.
We were resistant to photos?
Well, not so much resistant. But
my memory is different than yours.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my goodness, this is serious.
Yeah,
we need to move on it.
Mm-hmm.
It gave us impetus.
Yeah.
It's easy enough when there's not money immediately available to postpone things. So we just have to keep it in front of us.
Resistant.
Thank you for that. Okay. No, we don't resist. Member Grego.
Yes, I appreciate the discussion around this issue, and I think I've said it a few times before, is that this is not unique. I mean, a lot of the rural areas that have limited resources, it's not like they don't want to do this. It's just that there's just not the money to do this. And so yet there eliminated from the PL 8499 program, which they desperately need if there's going to be high water out there. What do they do then? I mean, so, again, with advocacy and pointing out the issues, especially for the rural North State, levies, this is something that needs to be brought to light, is that we have to find some way of correcting, either through a subvention like the Delta area has, or other means of finding some money to make these corrections so that they're eligible for this insurance program through the feds. Thank you.
President Dolan, can I mention one thing I forgot?
Well said. Of course you may. Ms.
And
Nagy.
I'm glad you brought that up, Member Griego, because one thing that did happen this winter in 2023 on this levee system, we had a crack form at the waterside toe. It was much bigger than the crack that you see there, much deeper, much wider. We had the Corps and DWR out on site for a different technical assistance item. We said, hey, can you swing by? They weren't concerned about it at the time. We still haven't been able to see it yet. It's been difficult to burn this year. We haven't had a lot of burn days. Yolo County has shut us down a lot. As soon as we can burn and we go out to look at this particular section, we'll see if that crack is still there. But it extended quite a bit. This particular levee system is not eligible for PL 8499, even though we had submitted an LOI prior to the event. So I just wanted to put that out there. You might see me coming back saying, hey, we have a way more erosion from this past flood event that we just haven't been able to observe quite yet. And so, yeah, it continues to be a challenge.
Through the chair, if I might just add on to that.
Member Griego, yes.
So if that levee would have failed during their high water period, there would have been money to repair that levee, or emergency money. There would have been emergency,
Yes.
a situation
Flood
where,
fight.
a flood fight.
Yes.
Yeah. So why are we waiting till then? That's my question, is why do we wait till then?
Right.
If there's money for a flood fight, then there should be some money for repairs like these. And so I guess that's just my point. And thank you for bringing me to that conclusion.
Thank you for that. You're not actually expecting a comprehensive answer, are you?
No, we don't have enough time.
No, yeah, yes. Sorry. Member Griego and I, we've been at another level of government where we know how you ask the question and it's like, okay. All right, thank you, gentlemen. And Ms. Nagy. I'm not supposed to, yeah, never mind. Okay, thank you, board. No, I'm not gonna say thank you, guys, because somebody will say, what's wrong with you, Jane? Okay. I need some coffee, so we're going to take a 10-minute break. Sorry for that. If you have an objection, I apologize. 10-minute break, and I'll watch the clock. Mr. Jones? Do you know, Chavez, where he is? Does anyone know where Board Member Ramirez is?
On a phone call. Send out the search parties.
See, he does things for me, which is great, so I don't know if this is active. Mr. Valines, can you hear us? Or do we have to set you up again?
I hear you. Can you
All
hear
right.
me?
I can. We don't have Ryan, so I'm a little discombobbled, but I think we'll just go.
Oh, Ryan took good care of me. We're all good.
I gave him a new title. Did you notice?
I did. I like it.
How did you?
He deserves it.
Yeah. All right, we are proceeding with our agenda. Thank you all for, well, I was going to take the break anyway, but thank you for being kind about it. We are at item 9 on our agenda, the Department of Water Resources. See, maybe I needed a longer one. Department of Water Resources items, and the first one is a report, which is submitted to us. And I know that we read it. There were some emails going back and forth on some of the things between certain board members and staff. So it's great. We appreciate that we received that. And I understand it's to be submitted in writing. Welcome back. Mr. Jones is here now, so I feel better. So that is announcing that item. Did anybody want to say anything about that report? No? No. Then we'll proceed. Item number 9B. And the next thing starts with 9 as well, 9B. We are pleased to have an informational briefing on the Delta Conveyance Project. And Carrie Buckman from the Department of Water Resources will provide it. Thank you for being patient and welcome.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but that doesn't always mean that it's on.
It's green. I'm hoping for the best.
What do you think? It's on. Okay.
It's on? Okay.
We got it. Thank you.
Thank you, President Dolan and members of the board. I'm happy to be here and get to talk to you today. I am Carrie Buckman. I'm DWR's Environmental Program Manager on Delta Conveyance, so I am leading the planning and permitting efforts around the project. Can I?
Should be 10.
There we go, success. So I just wanted to start with the status of the project, where we are. So right now we are working on the CEQA process, and we released a draft environmental impact report in July of 2022. We accepted comments through December of 2022, and we're working now to respond to those comments. And we are expecting to have a final EIR around the end of this year. On the NEPA side, the Corps of Engineers has been leading that effort. They released a draft environmental impact statement in December of 22, and comments closed on that in March of 23. So that effort is also underway, and they're expecting to complete a final environmental impact statement in early 24. We are also working to initiate formal consultation for the federal and state Endangered Species Acts. We're working to further develop our community benefits program through collaborative efforts with the community. We are planning some financial work to be completed next year to revise the existing cost assessment and also complete a cost benefit analysis. And we continually work on public outreach and engagement. So just today I'm going to talk a bit about the comments that we received and some themes and how we're responding to those. So just to give you an idea about the comments, we had a 142-day public comment period. We received about 729 letters and other communications. And just to flag, if there was a form letter, that only counts 1 in this count, even though we might have received multiple copies of that letter. So we divided those comment letters into individual comments on themes. And so that's subdivided into about 7,300 individual comments. Out of those, about 4,800 are detailed comments, so they're really specific to the Delta Conveyance Project and require more technical responses. and about 2,500 are more general, things like expressing support or opposition to the project. And they cover a very broad range of both policy and environmental technical topics. So these are some of the most popular comment themes that we received as we subdivided and categorized those comments. So the top one was water quality. We got about 500 individual comments on water quality. Also project description and objectives, fisheries and aquatic resources, the range and scope of alternatives, groundwater, terrestrial and biological resources, hydrologic modeling and climate change modeling, the CEQA process and general approach. And flooding, if you notice, has quite a few less. This was not, I'd say, one of the most popular, but we did include it on the list because we thought you'd probably be curious for how many comments we received. So we got about 90 individual comments on flooding. So our response to or our approach to responding to comments, we are responding to all substantive comments received. And we're responding in two formats. For the overarching recurring comments, we're developing common responses to respond to those themes. And then we're also developing individual responses to each of the comments in the comment letters. And we are also working to clarify CEQA versus non-CEQA topics and process. So today I'm going to talk about examples of how we're approaching the comment responses. These are for recurring comments and some themes and how we're responding to those comments, but I really want to flag this is all work in progress. This may change before we release the final EIR. We have not finished any of this work. We're still very much in the middle of it. So just to highlight, there may be some changes as we go forward. So starting with the range of alternatives, we received comments that proposed alternatives that address a variety of other statewide water supply issues. And our comment response is going to seek to clarify that alternatives must satisfy the project objectives and also that they must avoid or reduce potential significant environmental impacts of the proposed project. And those are based on CEQA guidance that help define how to develop a range of alternatives to a proposed project. And just an example here, we received a number of comments suggesting conservation and recycling as an alternative to delta conveyance. And we definitely recognize the importance of recycling and conservation as a state, and we work very hard as a state to encourage both of those types of measures. However, it's not an alternative for this effort. For this effort, because we are the owner and operator of the State Water Project, our objective is to continue the functionality of the State Water Project into the future in the face of many changes or many challenges like climate change, sea level rise, and earthquake risk. So conservation and recycling would essentially allow the State Water Project to continue to degrade, and so that is not meeting our project objectives. Talking a bit about CEQA and process comments, there were a lot of commenters that misunderstood CEQA requirements. So we're trying to help people understand what CEQA requires and that it's the lead agency's discretion based on substantial evidence to select analyses, evaluate findings, and draw conclusions. And I wanted to highlight here that the EIR is basically the beginning of the permitting process. There are many permitting efforts involved. And so the EIR doesn't need to meet the requirements for all of the future permitting. This is really more focused on CEQA. So we received a lot of comments about things that will be included in future efforts. I mean, an example that's probably relevant to you is the 408 process, which will come later. So all of the evaluations and modeling that we will include in the 408 process do not need to be in the EIR. This is the beginning. We'll have much more information by the time we get there. Talking about tribal resources, tribal cultural resources, DWR identified the entire Delta as a tribal cultural landscape in the EIR. And I'd say that a lot of commenters didn't necessarily understand our reasoning about how we were developing that concept. I think reviewers saw the tribal cultural landscape as a collection of individual sites, and they looked at it as we were evaluating impacts to many individual sites. But really, the way we were trying to identify this is that it's a landscape that has many broad character-defining features. Things include water and land use and terrestrial resources and fisheries habitat. And those are all interconnected in a really important way to tribes. So we're trying to respond to those comments in a way that will improve the understanding of that interconnectivity and the overall nature of that landscape, that it's important that these are all together and interconnected. And because of that, we're really trying to shift an understanding of the commenters to the more holistic way of looking at this. So as we identify impacts and mitigation, we really need to keep that in mind. So we can avoid, for example, archaeological resources are something that is part of the Delta tribal cultural landscape. And we can avoid archaeological resources when they are known, when we know where they are. But there are many other parts of the tribal cultural landscape that are more broad. For example, we can't fully avoid impacts to land use, water, terrestrial resources. So we've developed an approach that we will avoid as much as we can. We'll minimize and mitigate what's left. But because of the extent of the project and this interconnected element of the tribal cultural landscape, we aren't able to fully minimize and mitigate those impacts, and we do identify a significant unavoidable impact. We received a lot of comments offering support or opposition to the merits of the project, and our comment response will seek to raise awareness about the purpose and requirements of CEQA. DWR will consider all comments when making a decision on the project. We received a lot of comments about modeling. Commenters expressed concern that Calcium 3 does not adequately simulate operations of the State Water Project. And so our responses are focused on the idea that Calcium 3 is the best available tool for CEQA. And we're also talking about, there were a lot of concerns that we weren't modeling it as we intend to operate it. And I'd say there were sort of two specific pieces of that, and we're really trying to make the point that we are modeling it as we intend to operate. The first is about how we would work with the two facilities in the Delta. So we will have a South Delta facility, the existing Banks pumping plant, and this proposed new North Delta facility. And we've identified that during the winter and spring, we would operate with a South Delta priority. So we would continue to operate Banks as we do now and use the South Delta opportunistically to capture water during high flow conditions. And so that is included in the modeling, and some reviewers were concerned that that wasn't really what we were proposing, but it is. So we're going to make sure we're clear about that in the responses to comments. And then additionally, commenters were confused about whether we would be releasing additional water from storage to move through the Delta Conveyance Project. But really, we're looking at focusing on diverting excess flows. The idea here is to try to capture high flows when they're available in the winter and spring. So again, we are modeling it as intended. And then the second thing here is that we are responding that drought conditions are representative of potential effects of the Delta Conveyance Project. We got a number of concerns about emergency conditions, for example, if there is a temporary urgency change order, and that those are not reflected in our modeling effort. But under emergency conditions and a temporary urgency change order, in most cases, DWR and the State Water Project are only diverting a small amount of water. And because we have this South Delta priority, it would continue to be diverted from the South Delta, and we don't anticipate using the Delta Conveyance Project during that kind of condition. There was some confusion as well about baseline conditions and whether we established a baseline in 2020 or 2040. And I think a lot of this confusion came from the idea that the Delta Conveyance Project would need to be first constructed before it's operated. So operations likely wouldn't start until around 2040. So reviewers expected operations to be analyzed under a 2040 condition. But because CEQA, that's not what CEQA asks for. So CEQA asks for an analysis compared to the conditions at the time of the notice of preparation, which was in 2020. So we do have an analysis of the action alternatives in 2020 compared to existing conditions also in 2020. And that is based on CEQA requirements. We do, as CEQA asks for, include a no action alternative, a no project alternative, and that is in 2040. We do compare that as well to a 2020 existing condition so that we can characterize the types of changes that would occur because of climate change and sea level rise. So because we are looking at this a little, we want to be good planners. This is not required by CEQA, but we do include appendices with analyses under 2040 conditions, as well as a qualitative analysis of 2070 conditions. So our base CEQA analysis, as required, looks at 2020 conditions, But for information, we do have appendices with 2040 so that decision makers can have a suite of information available to them. And we also include an appendix with climate change sensitivity studies in 2040. We know there's a great deal of uncertainty around the types of climate change that could occur, and so we wanted to look at some other conditions to see if that had the potential to change the types of effects that we were seeing. Another thing I just wanted to mention is I think there was confusion about the concept of a historical period of record in the modeling. For example, people saw that we were modeling conditions from 1930 and thought, well, in 1930, things were completely different. But we're trying to explain that we're using the historical hydrology to help us get a range of hydrologic conditions, but we're not applying that hydrology to conditions in 1930, but rather 2020 conditions with 2020 facilities and 2020 regulations. Probably a concept that's familiar to all of you. Water quality, we got a lot of comments expressing concerns about water quality in the Delta, particularly related to cyanobacteria harmful algal blooms, or CHABs. And the response will seek to raise awareness of CEQA requirements and identify impacts compared to a baseline. To elaborate here, I think there was some confusion because we had findings that were less than significant after mitigation, and reviewers thought that that was a statement from DWR about the conditions in the Delta now, that we were saying that conditions are good related to cyanobacteria. But that's not what the finding indicates. We're not evaluating the conditions under the baseline. We're evaluating the increment that the project would contribute to identify if there's a concern. So that finding is really specific to the comparison of our proposed project and alternatives to a baseline, rather than a statement about the baseline conditions. We did receive similar types of thoughts about flooding as well, that when we would identify less than significant conditions about flooding, that was a statement about the flood conditions now and in the future. So that's not on the slide, but just to flag that. As I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't call flooding one of the key comment themes that we received, but I thought this would be something that you were all more interested in, so I included it. We received comments that expressed concerns about the project's likely detrimental effect on Delta levees and flood control infrastructure, and the state's obligations or commitments to levee maintenance or management throughout the Delta. So we will seek to raise awareness as we're responding to comments about CEQA requirements to identify impacts compared to a baseline. Again, the same type of comment for water quality, that we are not making a finding about levee conditions. We are just looking at whether we would worsen conditions. And we will also seek to explain that existing programs and current funding associated with the levees in the Delta are outside of our project. There are many state and DWR efforts. They are independent from the Delta Conveyance Project. So finally, I wanted to close with just a little bit about conceptual operations. This project is really designed to help adapt to climate change and the variability that we expect in the future. And I'd say the last couple of years give us a pretty good idea about some of the changes that we're anticipating into the future. And in water year 21-22, it was a critically dry water year, and we had a 5% allocation on the State Water Project. In that year, however, we also had record-setting storms in October and December. And if we had been able to capture high flows during and after those storm events, we would have been able to augment supplies about 236,000 acre-feet of water, which would be enough to supply over 2.5 million people for a year, or nearly 850,000 households for a year. And that would have been incredibly important in that critically dry year. In this past year, we would have also been able to capture additional supplies in January. And if people remember this year, we had wet conditions in January, and then conditions dried in February, and we weren't really sure what was happening, and DWR asked for a temporary urgency change order from the state board. With the Delta Conveyance Project, we would have had a different baseline under those conditions, and so it may not have been necessary to ask for that temporary urgency change order, or those supplies may have helped better manage going into February, when we still thought that we were in a pretty dry condition overall. So with that, that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the PowerPoint, which we will receive and share. Very helpful. We know there's a ways to go. Board members? Member Bosler?
So I just want to appreciate your thoroughness and dedication to a really strong review process on a project of this magnitude. But so appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Let the record show many nods on that one. Board members. Member Johnson.
Thank you. Brian Johnson for the transcript. Thank you for coming here and for the presentation. I also found it very helpful. Something you said early on caught my attention, but I want to make sure I understand what it was you were saying. You mentioned that the CEQA document isn't necessarily the final analysis for all of the permits. Some of that analysis could come later, and I believe you mentioned the 408. And that may be right. It sounds plausible that there are other permits that have other needs, but I think I assume the reason you're here is because you're also expecting to have a permit that comes before us for decision, and for us, we do need a CEQA document, right, to be able to make that decision. And we're expecting that it'll be your CEQA document that we'll be using for that decision, right? And not having that's not one of the categories of things that's going to be analyzed later, that we would have to have a supplement or something to do a CEQA document for our decision.
Yes.
Just checking.
Yes, and we have coordinated with staff to try to make sure that information is included. We also have a comment letter that we work through. This is a decision that the board would have to make later, and certainly board staff is probably more suited to answering that part of the question than I am. But if there was something that wasn't included, we would have to consider it at that point. We're not predetermining that this would meet all of your needs. That's entirely up to you.
Understood. I just was checking that the plan is for that document to be the one that we're using.
Okay. Any other board members? Anyone here in the audience? No one's standing up? No one's raising their hand? Do we have any hands raised?
Yeah, we have Deidre Desjardins.
Deidre Desjardins? You can
Thank you.
Deirdre, you're on.
Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to point out that the modeling of salinity intrusion at the North Delta Index includes, it's called a glass wall assumption, that none of the existing levees are overtopped, even at 10 feet of sea level rise. And so there is a nexus of the project as currently modeled with with levee funding, because right now there isn't even funding to raise the levees 1 foot for 1 foot of sea level rise by 2050. And it's a huge issue because if levees start to fail in the Central Delta, it's going to affect the hydrodynamics, and particularly the kind of analysis that's been used when you look at multiple island failure. It was just developed for earthquake analysis, and wasn't looking at long-term erosion of the levees if the islands are left flooded. So there is a major nexus with the flood board. And the other issue is that the project is being constructed for our current estimate of a 1 in 200 year flood from the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And there's a number of reasons why that estimate might be low, which I won't go into. But if the project is supposed to protect the state water project from all hazards, a 1 in 200 year flood protection, there isn't looking at more extreme floods that we know are getting more likely with climate change. And Daniel Swain has estimated that there's a 50-50 chance that we'll see a flood at least as large as the Great Flood of 1862 over the next 40 years. And it's likely that would overwhelm a lot of the levees in the Delta. And the ArcStar modeling shows that it would overwhelm the intake location. So if this, one of the core purposes of the project is to increase resiliency with climate change and not have outages, the analysis is inadequate both over the intermediate term because of increased riverine flooding that we've seen around the world, and also because over long term, there isn't any modeling of the actual likely salinity intrusion if the levees are overtopped. And I do think it's more defensible. So it's been argued that that the North Delta location is more defensible than the South Delta location, but it really would need a plan for maintaining and upgrading the North Delta levees. So we have submitted this as comments. I think it's very misleading to say that the project is adaptation to sea level rise when you haven't, and we're going to consider the levee investment separately when your only modeling assumes the levees aren't overtopped. And I hope that the department will correct this. Thank you.
Ms. Jordan, did I hear you say that those comments were submitted during the comment period?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I also wrote a blog post on the modeling. And I referred to Professor Bent Flipberg wrote about mega projects and strategic misrepresentation and optimism bias. And the failure of DWR to model high sea level rise impacts was one of the reasons the Delta Stewardship Council sent the project back. And it was based in part on my testimony. And I looked at that modeling and I thought, and the assurances in the EIR that the North Delta intakes were resistant to sea level rise. And I thought, this is strategic misrepresentation. It's right out of Flipberg's work. And we need an honest look at those intakes. And I went down to DWR and advocated in June of 2019 that they do modeling of the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority of the North Delta intakes. And they were planning how to pour concrete based on the previous intake locations. So in spite of all the new science that's come out about accelerated sea level rise, we haven't really looked at it. And I think it's a huge issue. We know that at some point the Delta will flood, and how long we maintain the levees will affect that. But we're just not doing the kind of work and careful modeling and evaluation, either for extreme riverine flooding or for sea level rise for this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. Any other hands up?
Yeah, we have one from T. Milford Harrison and then also Matt Zadar.
All right. What's the last name there? T. Milford Harrison. Did you hear that you were called?
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Harrison.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm Milford Harrison. I'm a member of the board of the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, and we are one of the partners with, we are a state water contractor with DWR, and we're one of the partners in the Sites Reservoir effort and also Delta Conveyance. And I really appreciated the report today, and I wanted to make sure that a copy was available that I could share with my board and my staff. And I'd like to get the reference. I missed the name of the lady who gave such a great presentation. So I'm just asking, reaching out on behalf of our district for some information. Thank you.
Mr. Harrison, this is President Dolan. I made a note here, and I'm now going to say it to our executive officer, that this PowerPoint be provided to the board and that we will provide it to all interested parties. And the person who gave the presentation, I'm sorry, I didn't announce that with more clarity, is Carrie Buckman, Department of Water Resources, Environmental Program Manager. And I agree, it was a good presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Any, and the next one is Matt Zadar. Mr. Zadar.
Greetings, and again, thank you for the presentation and for all the hard work that's going into this and every consideration of comments that we have submitted to date. As you know, San Joaquin County is about 2 legal deltas. There's concerns as reflected.
Mr. Zadar, there's some feedback going on. Is it us?
I don't know where that would be coming from.
I don't know. There's an echo to each of your words. All right, go ahead. We'll see if it's gone.
We'll try again. Is that a little bit maybe?
Yes.
Our comments are well documented in the EIR, and we'll look forward to those responses. The high points really are that the draft EIR fails to credibly describe the project and its operation. And while the EIR purports to describe the tunnel as a project level analysis in the CEQA document, the description of the resulting analysis failed to provide enough information that the public can really understand the projects and its environmental implications of this very massive project, including those under operating conditions when there is flood and drought. In addition, the location of the major project features, the proposed operation of the project is unclear. While the proposed operational criteria are included, it refers to real-time decision-making and adaptive management, which sounds like a lot more temporary urgency change orders and things like that, which is why we would still advocate for having a true Delta water quality control plan that sets the standard for how we would evaluate impacts. And without an update to that plan, I think that this document will always be inadequate because the standard will not be set. We've also had a lack of happiness with the alternatives that were considered. We're pretty sure that those are inadequate for full consideration of all the alternatives and a comparison of what we believe are viable alternatives. And without doing that, I think the project impacts are not fully disclosed. So that's just a quick highlight of the major things that we were very concerned about. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other hands raised? I'm asking for hands raised. Those would be those participating online. Any further comments from board? Questions? Audience? Online? Ms. Buckman, did you have anything you wanted to conclude with?
No, thank you for having me.
Thank
I
you very
appreciate it.
much. Yes, we expect we'll see you and or others as this progresses.
Yes, thank you.
Good job. Thanks very much. All right, that concludes what we call the Department of Water Resource items. We now proceed to number 10 on our agenda. These are board items. The first of which is an action item, board members. Ruth Darling of Flood Planning and Programs Branch, board staff, and Mary Jimenez, manager of System-Wide Multi-Benefits Initiative Branch, Department of Water Resources. Say that twice. Nice to see you. will present the information for the Yola Bypass Comprehensive Study Feasibility and the cost share agreements with the local and with the local entities. Federal as well, correct? Ms. Darling, I'm going to stop trying to explain it and allow you to do it. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, President Dolan. Good morning still, President Dolan, members of the board, Ruth Darling with the Flood Planning and Programs Branch Board staff. I also have with me today Mary Jimenez that will present a couple slides. We are coordinating together with DWR as well as the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency as the non-federal sponsors for the Yola Bypass Comprehensive Study. We also have on the line Alicia Kirchner from the Army Corps of Engineers, Tina Teed, as well as Kim Carcel. So if the board has any questions for the Army Corps, those folks might need to come off mute.
And of course they will.
So today, the requested board action is to adopt Resolution 2023-07, and this is to enter into a feasibility cost share agreement, as well as a local feasibility cost share agreement for the Yola Bypass Comprehensive Study. It is also to delegate the board council authority to sign the certificate of authority and delegate the executive officer to sign the self-certification of financial capability and delegate the board president authority to sign the certification regarding lobbying. So a little bit of overview. You heard this last month during the informational item. The comprehensive study was authorized in the Water Resources Development Act of 2020, Section 209. And this states that the Secretary shall conduct a comprehensive study to identify actions to be undertaken for the comprehensive management of the Sacramento River in the vicinity of the Yola Bypass System for the purposes of flood risk management, ecosystem restoration, water supply, and recreation. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary for a couple slides, and I'll be back when she's done.
Thank you. Ms. Jimenez, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Ruth, and good morning, President Dolan, members of the board. Mary Jimenez with DWR. Just going to continue on a couple slides here from Ruth's presentation before handing it back to her. So as the board saw last month from Ruth Darling, the project partners involved are shown on the slide. So our federal partner, the Corps of Engineers, and the non-federal partners, the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency at the local level, and then at the state level, the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and DWR. So the board and SAFCA providing the non-federal sponsor role to the Corps of Engineers, and folks at DWR supporting project management on behalf of the state. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Do I need to advance? All right, thank you. So a bit more for the board today on DWR roles more specifically. So project management on behalf of the state is being led by Corey Lasso and his team in the Flood Projects branch of the Division of Flood Management. I'm here today on behalf of DWR and the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives. Myself and my team will be working closely with Ruth and her folks at the Flood Board staff, providing more of the planning leadership from the state of California, subject matter expertise, coordination and support, a lot of which we expect to be particularly important on a study such as this. And so working to build alignment, we featured two really prominent and important efforts here on the slide for the board today. So we intend to leverage the ongoing work of the Yola Bypass Cash Flow Master Plan that is underway. Also pleased to let the board know that this past month, my team at DWR, we recently executed a contract with the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency to perform a locally led study of the Upper Elkhorn Basin. So that is being initiated this month as we speak. And among the benefits of that locally led study is really bringing together updated interests and alignment all the way from the landowner level on up. So getting that going this month is both timely and critical, and that is happening concurrent with our state-led study. And with that, Ruth, are you ready? Thank you.
And just a note on the Upper Elkhorn study, I will be joining for the board the strategic planning work group that will be led for the Upper Elkhorn study. So I'll be reporting out on those activities through the EO report. I can also do that at board meetings as well. For the feasibility cost share agreement, so again, this is a USACE model agreement. There has been no drastic deviations that would require approval other than Sacramento District. It's a three-party agreement between the Army Corps, the non-federal sponsors, the Flood Board, and SAFCA. And the SAFCA Board authorized approval of the feasibility cost share, the local feasibility cost share agreement in 2023 of this year. I'm sorry, February of this year. And the local feasibility cost share agreement is the two-party agreement between the board and SAFCA. And the SAFCA board approved that. That date is wrong, February of this year. So the comprehensive study budget and funding, this is consistent with USACE policy. So we're estimating it currently at $3 million. The federal funding was appropriated of the fiscal year of 2023, and the state funding was included in this year's May revise for fiscal year 23-24. And again, for the study timeline, the board sent a letter of intent to the Army Corps in March of 2022 to initiate the comprehensive study. In February of this year, SAFCA Board adopted the resolution 2023-15 to approve entering into the agreement. You received an informational item on the FCSA and LFCSA last month. And this month, we're seeking approval of those to enter into the agreement and sign the certificates today. We are anticipating a signing ceremony in September with the Army Corps of Engineers, DWR, and SAFCA. We're planning that currently. We're hoping that will be on site somewhere within the region. And then it is anticipated there'll be a chief's report 3 years after the start of the study. So again, this requested board action to adopt resolution 2023-07, and I will turn it back over to the board president for any questions or discussion.
Thank you. Don't go far. Board members. I think the action is clear, what we need to do. Member Johnson? No? Counting bullet points.
Making sure I understand the situation.
No, we do. Okay. All right, I see no indication from the board. We do our homework. Anyone here in the room? Anyone with our online participants? No. Well, then I will call for action by the board. Is there someone to make the motion
I'll move it.
outlined in the staff recommendation?
I will move the staff recommendation.
Member Bosler moves. Member Johnson seconds. Please call the roll.
Board Member Ramirez. Board Member Grego.
Yes.
Board Member Countryman.
Yes.
Board Member Bosler.
Aye.
Secretary Johnson.
Aye.
Vice President Valines. Might have stepped away. President Dolan.
Aye. Mr. Valines, are you still on?
I
Going
don't
once?
see his number on mine.
Okay. He might be in a remote area and we've lost him temporarily. The motion carries. It is approved. 6 in favor and 1 not voting. Absent would be the right word. Okay. Thank you. Without the information and all the backup, it would have gone longer. So thanks very much. I look forward to something out in the field with the signing.
In September. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, then we'll move on to other items. The next series of items for the board to hear are information, which does allow discussion because they're on the agenda. 10B, as in boy, or better, is a presentation. Again, Ruth Darling will lead this, Flood Planning and Programs Branch, on the Sacramento San Joaquin Drainage District Assessment District Feasibility Study. We usually say SSJDD because we always talk in acronyms, so we'll try that rather than repeating. I see we have consultants here as well. Ms. Darling.
Thank you. Again, Ruth Darling with the Flood Planning and Programs Branch. And today I have with me Scott Brown, who is the lead for Larson, Warzel and Associates. They're the prime on the feasibility study contract. So we'll be sharing in the effort of this presentation. That's the previous presentation.
Are we waiting for something more specific to come up on the screen? Other than a photo of? The photo of Ruth Darling was fine with me. So we will just pan over to the people in the audience.
Well, I think that I'm going to have to email it because it's not in the folder, but I thought it was there yesterday. One second.
Mr. Jones has it. You want to all gather around his screen?
Thank you.
You want
It
to
was
share your
missing.
screen?
I can do that, yeah.
No, Chavez has it, right?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Our coordinators of technical issues do a great job. Is that
There we go. Okay.
It is now on the screen.
Thank you. Okay. So this is for the Sacramento San Joaquin Drainage District. We will be saying SSJDD throughout this presentation, Assessment District Feasibility Study. And this presentation will provide an overview. I will cover the background, the study scope and criteria, our stakeholder engagement and approach. And Scott will come in to cover categories of service, a bit on stakeholder feedback, our preliminary findings, and the status of the draft report of findings. And then I will go over next steps. So I thought it necessary to provide a bit of background, taking it, over 100 years ago. But I know that there is at least one board member that this study predates. So I wanted to just provide you with sort of how we got here. So in 1911, the Reclamation Board was established at the recommendation of the California Debris Commission, which is an agency of the federal government, for flood control activities in the Sacramento and San Joaquin valleys. And the responsibility of the Reclamation Board was to preserve and improve navigation and the reclamation and protection of lands susceptible to overflow. So in 1913, the legislature authorized the Reclamation Board to assume responsibility for protecting areas prone to flood and raise funds through assessment, and the benefited lands would pay for that assessment. So the purpose of the act was, the Reclamation Board Act of 1913 was to carry into effect the plans of the California Debris Commission for the flood control waters of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers and their tributaries. The act also empowered the board to acquire lands and right-of-way for project elements. It enlarged the board's membership from 3 to 7, and it created the SSJDD and placed it under the control and management of the Reclamation Board. So the SSJDD legal description is roughly 13 pages in length and references the boundaries of 19 counties, 12 tributaries, 2 ranchos, the Yolo Bypass, Rio Vista corporate city limits, and public land calls. So the Sacramento-San Joaquin Drainage District is the state entity whose purpose is acquiring property rights for flood protection, including the acquisitions of lands and easements. And the Central Valley Flood Protection Board is a state agency charged with the management and control of SSJDD properties. So there were historical SSJDD assessments that were executed from 1914 through the 1920s. Funds from these assessments were used to construct major flood control projects in the Sacramento Valley. And SSJDD assessments were created on the premise that beneficiaries pay. And these are those assessments that I just mentioned, as you can see, beginning in June of 1914 through August of 1919. So they were executed actually through 1914 through 1921, and they were closed out during the 1930s and 40s. These assessments were spread by the board upon 3,225,000 acres within SSJDD jurisdiction. And SSJDD assessments were used to construct major flood control projects within the Sacramento Valley. There were a large number of lawsuits that were initiated by landowners in different counties under General Assessment 1. However, the assessment was ultimately upheld by the California and U.S. Supreme Court. And then the world changed drastically. The Great Depression and World War II occurred. And so fast forward to 1956, the board was placed under DWR, and effective on January 1st, 2008, the name of the Reclamation Board was changed to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And then there's the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan 2017 update, and this identified the SSJDD Assessment District as a potential funding source for O&M and capital improvements. The 2017 flood plan update estimated that an SSJDD assessment could potentially gain $25 million per year in revenues. So this funding source was carried forward in the 2022 flood plan update. However, it was recategorized as an additional local funding source and not state funding. So the thought was that funds generated by an SSJDD assessment could accomplish the following: would create a sustainable long-term funding mechanisms that allow local maintaining agencies to be compliant with their operation and maintenance manual. And an SSJDD assessment will assure or could assure a more stable funding source for O&M activities with the additional goal of achieving compliance with the board's assurances to the Army Corps of Engineers. So after the board adopted the 2017 flood plan update, the board adopted resolution 2018-06. So this is consistent with our continue to fix what we have. This was the acceptable operation and maintenance of the state plan of flood control. It asserted the state's long-term goal of improved operation and maintenance and includes working towards PL 8499 eligibility and compliance with the O&M manuals. It confirmed the state's sustainable funding as a priority and acknowledged that the state is committed to working with maintaining agencies to improve operation and maintenance. The board received funding in 2018 to conduct a feasibility study to evaluate the feasibility of revitalizing the SSJDD assessment district. A contract with Larson Morzell and Associates was executed in December of 2019. And if determined feasible, Larson Morzell and Associates, one of the contract item was to develop an implementation process for the flood board to levy future assessments. So the study scope and criteria that was developed by LWA was to evaluate existing SSJDD authority. The stakeholder engagement piece was one of the biggest pieces that of the contract, and we needed stakeholder engagement initially to identify categories of service. And the idea of going back to stakeholders on a regular basis to inform them of the analysis and then receive feedback continues to happen throughout the contract, but it is one of the largest pieces of the contract as we went through it the past couple years. So also to perform a beneficiary analysis and evaluate test cases again, to receive stakeholder feedback to refine the beneficiary analysis, and then evaluate findings and recommendations. So this is the stakeholder engagement and stakeholder approach. I want to point out here that early on, it was determined that any assessment would still require a 2/3 landowner vote. We would have to change state law to make it anything less than that. So this requires local maintaining agency partnership and landowner support. The assessment cannot be unilaterally imposed. So this put context around our discussions with stakeholders from the beginning. So we really emphasize small group meetings, coordinating committee meetings, as well as workshops with stakeholders. The approach was to identify needs and potential areas of service, to conduct the current context analysis. So that's things like identify and review existing institutions, funding sources, and procedures for levy O&M and system-wide improvements, identify assumptions for current conditions, flood control, and infrastructure, and review and identify applicable laws and policies, including flood board authorities, California Water Code, California Government Code, and constitutional limitations to the assessment. Define beneficiaries, and then conduct the assessment methodology and test cases. So at each one of these boxes, we went back to stakeholders. So here we are at the fourth box, refine analysis and develop the preliminary draft of the report of findings, or the ROF. And then later this year is the public draft of the ROF and the final ROF. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Good morning, Mr. Brown.
Good morning, President Dolan, members of the board. Still morning. It's a pleasure to be here, first in-person post-COVID presentation, so
I agree.
feels good. So today, which one am I hitting? Okay, sorry about that. So today, I'm going to provide an overview of the categories of service that came out of the stakeholder engagement and walk through each one of those. Provide an overview of what we've accomplished under there. This is just a list of the categories. The first three categories came directly out of stakeholder engagement, and the last two categories came out of recommendations from the small community flood risk reduction programs, or SCUFers as we call them. So I'll start with the first category, and this was probably the category that took the most effort to work through with stakeholders, but it was to identify a service or a funding source that could leverage benefiting properties, assessments from those properties that are outside of the limits of the individual LMAs that maintain bypass levies. So just to put a little clarity on that, the local LMA that maintains those bypass levies has a boundary. They can't assess outside that boundary, but it's recognized that there are areas outside of the bypass, Natomas, Sacramento County. They do receive a benefit from the operation of the bypass, but they're not directly contributing funds to maintenance of the bypass. So this category was to see if there was a methodology we could come up with to try to generate funds from all beneficiaries directly to the LMAs. So our test cases we looked at were the Sutter and Yola bypasses. We went through multiple iterations and finally developed a methodology that considered the river and bypass systems together as a whole and defined the special benefit to properties associated with maintenance of the bypass levees based on the percentage of flow diverted into the bypasses that reduced flood risk off of the main stem. The methodology also accounted for general benefit that was provided from state funding to maintain 8361 facilities on the bypass. We developed a method for allocating the cost for maintaining the bypass levees to areas using the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan estimated annual damage modeling. Didn't want to rip through the acronyms there without saying them. And that model essentially reports back how much damage could occur within a specific impact area, those impact areas being defined in the model. And we use that as a proxy to allocate the benefit. So if you had, let's just use some rough numbers, you had $100 million worth of damage identified in the model, the percentage of that damage to all damages in the model was used to allocate the budget to these impact areas. And then within that model, we could apportion that amount of the assessment down to the land use type and estimate potential assessment rates for residential, commercial, smaller properties, other property types. The methodology was that we would collect revenue from everyone, or identify the revenue need from everyone. We would credit back the local agencies that are actually maintaining the levee system for the work that they're doing. And then the revenue would be collected by the state and passed back to those agencies to provide sufficient funding. I think through negotiations or discussion, I wouldn't say negotiations, sounds negative, through discussions with the stakeholders, we felt that we had developed a methodology that was technically feasible and defensible, but there were still some concerns. I think the primary concern that came about was just uncertainty on landowners that aren't near the bypasses having to pay for bypass, and how to capture a message to support a property owner approval process moving forward. There was also quite a bit of discussion about 8361 facilities. I was not around at this time, so I don't know the exact discussions, but there's inconsistencies in which levee reaches are 8361 facilities and which are not. And 8361, section of the Water Code, just identifies levee reaches that are to be maintained by the state versus levee reaches that are being maintained by a local maintaining agency. And I guess I should say, if there are any questions along the way, feel free to jump in, so we don't pile on at the very end with a bunch of questions. So any questions on that before?
So do a pause. Member Grego?
Yeah, what about LAFCO issues? How does that play into this whole thing? When you look at expanding your boundaries for assessment, what's the process? Have you looked at that?
So we felt that LAFCO applies to local agencies, right? So as a state-led assessment, the district is already established. The boundary basically spans the valley. There's also authority in there that you could assess a property that's outside of the boundary if you could demonstrate there's benefit to that property. So the boundary line is not specifically important based on that authority. And so that the SSJDD assessment could be levied within an area that we would have to define a boundary for that assessment, but it would not have any LAFCO issues that we were aware
so
of.
LAFCO only applies to local government when it comes to assessments and expanding boundaries and such, not to the state.
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you.
That's what the L is. That's what the L is. Board members? Okay, you can
All right.
keep going.
Second category. Oh, I would go too far? I jumped.
Oh,
Thank you.
well,
All right. Second category was to look at opportunities within a corridor, a river system corridor, to see if there were activities that would be led by the board or the state that could benefit all properties within that corridor, and look at economy of savings for spreading that benefit across all properties, not having individual LMA Prop 218 assessments needed to capture those. We had discussions with the Feather River region was our test case. We did come up with a few activities that had some general support amongst stakeholders. One of those being resource agency permits for the entire corridor versus individual permits for O&M activities by each LMA. Rodent control came up primarily around nutria migration up the system. I think that was kind of in the news at the time, so that might have been a hot topic. And private security patrols was also identified as an ongoing concern by LMAs and significant cost that they each individually take on to have security patrols along their system, and if a regional contract for that might provide some economy of scale. In the end, the real uncertainty about this category from stakeholders was that they weren't clear that whether landowners would support a state-led assessment versus, why isn't my LMA doing it, right? I pay my LMA, why aren't, just dealing with it on a local basis. Any questions?
No surprise with that last button.
All right, the third category is service. Megan's still here, so this is hers. Credit for this one. So this looks at communities that are not in a local maintaining agency. They're located in a state maintenance area. So they have no local governments to allow them to proceed with a Prop 218 specific for a capital improvement or repair. We did look at the Princeton community in MA1 as our test case. There was a SCUFFER study, small community flood risk reduction study, that was done to provide a capital improvement for that community, and that study identified cost and approximate local assessments that would be needed to maintain and finance that project. So coming out of that study, we looked at, could an SSJDD assessment be used to absorb those front-end costs associated with establishing a local government that could implement a 218 assessment and issue debt for the construction of that repair. We evaluated the methodology from the SCUFFER studies and found it to be defensible under the SSJDD authority. And in actuality, it's probably the one activity that is very consistent and closely aligned with the original authority of the SSJDD to provide improvements. So in the end, we felt like it's technically feasible to move forward. The feedback that we did hear was that's a good option, but it may be that the local county could move forward with an assessment, assuming the community all lies within a single county, right? Because counties can't assess outside of their jurisdiction. Princeton does. And I think it would come down to, at the time, who wants to step forward? Does the county have other priorities? Would they rather not be in the driver's seat, right? So a lot of locally led decisions, I think, are consistent around all these categories. Any questions or comments there?
I don't see any indication
Okay.
of that.
All right, so these last two categories were activities that we identified that would allow the board to support implementation of projects at a local level, sort of independent of the stakeholder engagement that we did. These were sort of adders that we identified. One of this category here, when we looked at the SCUFFER studies, we had multiple small communities with high cost projects relative to their ability and funding capacity at a local level. And so the idea was that we could take multiple projects, multiple communities, combine them under one regional assessment that would be of a bigger scale, broader assessment base, and allow these projects to be implemented on a programmatic basis. I think the key thing here, we did look at, just for test cases, we looked at combining Knights Landing and Grimes together. So Knights Landing in Yolo County, Grimes in Colusa County. What if those two communities agreed to come together and be assessed under the SSJDD authority? One of the first things we identified was those two communities need to sort of voluntarily agree to come together. The assessment base doesn't change just because the communities come together. So the projects would need to be phased. There would need to be agreements on priorities and the sequence of those improvements. All those things would need to be put in place in order for a SSJDD assessment to be really successful. The key here was that an assessment through SSJDD could reduce costs of multiple individual assessments and absorb the burden on those communities for those upfront costs associated with those assessments. Doesn't say that that's a gift of public funds. It's just absorbing the costs up front. Those would be repaid over time through the assessment collections. I think the ending here is it's a potential, and it requires sort of local voluntary communities to come forward and request this. Any questions here before I move on? Yes, sir.
Earlier,
Member Countryman.
you said that the project could be implemented on a programmatic basis. I didn't understand what that meant.
So I use that term sort of loosely to say that there are, say, two major capital improvement projects in each community. On a programmatic basis, being phasing the projects over time so that both community flood risk could be reduced sort of together, sort of that all boats rise at the same time. Looking for opportunities to spread the timing of the improvements out so that that assessment could be reduced and spread out over time as well.
I might expand on that, and it's come up before from local entities primarily, but this board has talked about it. There are individual projects here, there, and everywhere that have their jurisdiction that is to do it. And so they are required to get various permits from environmental, the Army Corps, and everyone else. There's always at least 6, sometimes 14. So does this district here do it? And then the next one that's 3 miles away does the same thing, and the next one 5 miles away does the same thing? Or do we take it as a river reach or an area and and do it as one, so it's comprehensive. So maybe comprehensive is the word, or programmatic, something like that. Because those costs and time delay really add up. And if you have a small district that needs to get that, it can take 4 years while they garner volunteers to do all the paperwork. And then you always have 2 years to wait for certain permitting entities to even respond. So it's brought up there. So that's what the programmatic means to me. And the way we talked about, so, yeah, to combine that. And there are some areas where there's a need to improve an existing system, but there is no room for mitigation within that system's boundary, but a mitigation is necessary. So that's one where more comprehensive or programmatic permit could assist everyone, the environment and people's lives.
Comment noted and will be wordsmithed and clarified in the
Very
report.
simple, very challenging to implement. But certainly a theme through all of this is, would there be landowner, would there be local support?
Mhm. That's correct.
Not without some effort. I'm ready to do that.
All right, the final category is a little out of the box for what the flood board is typically responsible for.
Not really.
When we look at non-structural flood mitigation, this is raising structures in the floodplain, flood-proofing commercial buildings. FEMA has a program to provide 75% of those costs. The remaining 25% fall on the property owner to fund. And they can be significant, and it's often a challenge or a hurdle for implementing these non-structural improvements. So what we looked at is a program very similar to the PACE program. I'll discuss that in a second. But it would be a program that would be managed by the board under the authority of SSJDD to provide or to finance that 25% and allow those property owners to repay the cost over time through their property tax bills. This is modeled after the Property Assessed Clean Energy, better known as PACE program. This is the program that people use, I guess most notably, to put solar panels on their house, right? I don't have 30,000 hanging around, but I want solar. I can put solar panels on and pay that over time on my property tax bills. So we looked at leveraging the SSJDD authority to provide a district-wide assessment, or creating a district-wide assessment that property owners could voluntarily annex into, very much like PACE is. They could come forward. The state could, or the board under this program would manage the FEMA funding throughout, so there's economy of scale there for property owners not having to take that burden on. It also would support local agencies trying to get these projects done on a local level. The main hurdle I didn't point out here that I needed to, the main hurdle for that 25% is that local communities can't use any tax-exempt debt for improvements to private property. It has to be used for the public. And so that prevents an assessment to collect money and then improve individual private property. And that's the hurdle that we could get around by this type of program. So back to how the board could utilize it. The board could manage the FEMA funding across the district. It could leverage general obligation bonds in lieu of doing specific individual debt issuances. And again, this would be on a sort of a rolling basis. You might get, you know, a handful of property owners that are willing to come forward. They would annex in on an annual basis. You would apply for that funding, administer the federal funding, and then leverage the GO bonds to issue the debt needed to complete the whole project. And the board would administer the assessments with the local counties. It's a little outside of your normal area of practice, but we thought it was worth at least considering. It's a hurdle to these non-structural flood mitigations. And that was also identified as an concern in the small community where there were non-structural mitigation proposed. Questions?
You might want to remove the adjective little. This is intriguing. Some of that's outside of my experience of doing something that I would consider comparable on a county level. But yeah, pretty difficult to explain to folks who are not either tax experts or government nerds like some of us are. And it might slow some of the other things that we see as more viable. That's all. Member Ramirez.
My name's Kurt. I'm not either one of those, tax expert or government nerd.
Yeah.
But I have a tax question.
That was not pejorative.
No, I hear you. So private property owners can't use tax exempt debt, right? That's the federal, those GASB standards, is that what drives, where does that live?
They do.
I believe so. I believe so. I believe.
Because it's a federal program, we're providing the non-federal match. It's
This
probably
is
a condition of the program that you can't.
I'm not sure.
You know?
I'm not sure exactly the answer to your question. That's a little outside my wheelhouse, but
There's a limit on the tax exempt debt.
Right.
The federal government sets that. It's allocated at a state board.
But is it limited or is it just not possible with this program because?
I'm not familiar with the application here and how they are thinking about using it, but it's very oversubscribed right now.
Okay.
But because of the state has been putting so much money into housing, and that's where it's mainly being used, the tax exempt debt to build low-income housing. It has gone for other types of infrastructure projects in the past, but it is limited by the federal government, and to expand that greatly would require an action by the federal government.
Right. Yeah, it's, I'm going to agree with President Dolan. It's intriguing. It seems like there's just hurdles on this
well,
one.
and I agree. The reason we included it is as we went through some of these small community flood risk reduction program projects, there were alternatives that you could construct levee improvements to get 90% of the community, and then there were fringe properties that needed to be raised up out.
Right.
That's what we're talking about here with the non-structural repairs or mitigation. So it kind of, there's a little bit of a nexus, I would say, with the objective to reduce risk for communities through levee improvements or O&M repairs with a sensitivity to cost benefit, right?
Right.
So you could extend that levee improvement to encapsulate the whole community, but it just is a significant increase over the benefit that's part of that cost, right?
I think it's great you guys flagged the issue. I just see this being put someplace else with a more flexible fund source on the non-federal side to make it whole, right? Like, it's a problem. So how we address it, there's maybe more than one way. This is one way it could be done, but there's probably a different way you could do it also. So I think it's on the list. It just might end up in a different place someday. But thank you for the background.
Might be a list for something, some other project. Member Bosler.
Okay, after pulling all those categories together, working
Is that,
through,
no?
oh, sorry.
Wait, are you raising your hand or saying, no, she doesn't need to talk now? Okay.
Sorry.
Wait me. I'm not doing that great today, but thank you. Mr. Brown.
All right. So after coordinating with stakeholders, we kind of summarize their feedback into these four main themes. Landowner support, primary concern. There's also a concern that, as Ruth mentioned at the beginning, that the SSJD assessment was recategorized as state funding to local funding in the 22 update because with the need for landowner approval, it's essentially just local money that is being collected by the state, right? So we recategorize that as a local funding stream. And so there is significant amount of competition for funding from a community because there's only so much capacity available from property owners through assessments. That was a big concern. Some of the categories were utilizing the SSJDD to collect funds and redirect those to local maintaining agencies, and they felt that might be administrative redundancy that wouldn't be received well by landowners or would, maybe extra costs that were could be avoided by, keeping things local. And then they were very adamant about the fact that an JDD assessment should not supplant increased general fund spending. That shouldn't be used as an offset, right? Just because you're generating money here doesn't mean that alleviates the need for general funding. A couple of other things were, no, I did catch those already. Sorry, I already talked about those things. Anything here? Stakeholder feedback?
So your couple other things are not to be added?
No, the couple other things I covered under the other topics.
Oh, the first
I just
two.
had some
Yeah,
notes that
the
I
prior
forgot that I
one,
incorporated.
yes.
My apologies.
I would just say regarding that fourth bullet, that any new revenue not then mean that the state general fund gets to reduce their contribution. That's something that the board feels pretty strongly about as well. That we don't tax local folks so that the state general fund can reduce their expenditure. But there's just a greater need than what's being funded right now. So what's being funded stays. And if we could figure out how to finance the need without huge burdens or redundancy, or duplication, or massive overhead, that would be good. Not easy. I think there's a reason they just abandoned it in 1930. And by the way, none of us were around then.
True.
Just wanted to make that clear. When Ruth said something like this, some things happened before there was one member who joined the board. It's like some things happened before all of us joined the board. I'm accused of being around here since World War II, but that's not correct.
So our preliminary findings at this point, the authority could be used. It would require landowner approval, and because of that, we always knew that.
We always knew that.
Those local communities need to initiate with the board versus the board pushing down to local communities for an assessment. That was the feedback we got from stakeholders. And it should be considered as local funding even though it's collected by the state. That was based on feedback. We do feel that an assessment could support local communities by absorbing the burden to the upfront cost of that burden to raise local share of capital projects. And they can be significant, but there are concerns there about whether that's the right path by those locals. We have also, identified we have assessment methodologies that are technically justifiable under Prop 13 for the assessment district. We're not concerned there. It's just that landowner approval at the end of the day is the large looming uncertainty. The other thing to say here, I didn't say earlier, the 8361 facility list was a large concern of stakeholders, not to be addressed in our feasibility study for an assessment, but noted through stakeholder feedback. And I think stakeholders would like to see some consistency provided for that list. And then viability, last thing I'll say is viability of a new assessment is not to be confused with the technical ability to assess. It's really, the feasibility is really tied to that landowner approval at the end of the day. And coming up with a clear, concise justification and reason for the board leading that effort versus a local. Seems to be the theme that we've heard and recognized. And I see some questions.
Member Bosler, yes.
Well, I mean, you keep talking about landowner. I mean, this is a really big and controversial topic, so I just want to say that. So nothing I should say, and I'm construing a position at this point. But you keep talking about landowner approval, but this is actually an authority that rests at the state and with the legislature in terms of taxation in this case. So landowner approval is not necessary in order to implement something here.
It is under the SSJD authority, the section of the Water Code authorizes.
But it could be changed in statute.
It could be changed in statute. We did look at the feasibility of what could that be changed to, right? The consensus was we could administratively change the threshold from 2/3 to 50%. That would be consistent with Proposition 218. There shouldn't be much pushback on that. Anything less than that, we did not feel was feasible to achieve through legislative change. We think taxpayer association and would come out in opposition from it. And
Definitely.
and it just seemed like a very high hurdle to try to cross from a feasibility testing perspective. So everything was viewed and tested under the guise of it's feasible to reduce the threshold to meet the same threshold as Prop 218, which is 50% or more. Would not be feasible to eliminate that and allow the state to just impose the assessment without approval. Thank you for letting me make that clarity.
It's challenging to make it clear in one sentence, that's for sure.
Okay, we're almost done. I was hoping to get done in the morning, but we're 10 minutes past. Report of findings is just an outline of what the report's going to talk about. Introduction has all that background information that Ruth went over in more detail, and kind of the setting of the need and what drove us to the study. Document all the stakeholder engagement that developed and resulted in what the scope of the services in the study. Detail each study or each category of service there. We will have a chapter on the addressing the legislative authority and potential changes we see there. And then the implementation plan chapter will identify some next steps to advance the concepts. It's likely to come a little short from this is the steps you need to take to put an assessment in place, because again, we feel that the local communities need to drive that process and bring that to the board. So if that were to occur, this is what the implementation plan would look like. That's our take at this point. We'll be back before you to talk about that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth.
So at the point this comes back to the board, the board is going to receive this 11-chapter report,
Correct.
hopefully more in advance than the Thursday before the Friday meeting. Just saying.
Joking. Yes.
I-
The answer is yes.
Yes, just saying. Well, yeah, okay. Ms. Darling.
So
Some
immediate.
work still to be done.
Yes, there's work still to be done. So completing the preliminary draft report of findings in LWA, and consultants will share that with board staff for review and comments. And then we need to share the preliminary draft report of findings with stakeholders so we can receive feedback and comments on the report. And to release the draft report of findings for public comment in September of this year, and then receive comments, make any necessary revisions to the report, prepare a final report of findings, and present it to the board in December of this year.
Thank you.
And that's
That sounds a
essentially
little
our
rapid, but
last slide.
better than stretching it out for years. We'll try. Okay. Wow.
So we can open it up for discussion.
Looking to the left, looking to the right. You know you're to the right. Comment? Or are you just waving at me?
I'll get into the queue, and if I was first, I'll go first.
All right. No? Member Johnson, your cue is up. Were you first?
Oh, no, I don't care about the order, Brian.
I'm at a loss whether you're raising your hand or just looking at me. Member Johnson. Then Member Bosler.
Thanks. Yeah, and before getting into details, I just want to test some really basic understanding of how this works, at the risk of seeming really slow on the uptake. So the boundary for the beneficiary analysis and the assessment and the vote for this district isn't predefined. It's not the whole district. It could be people beyond the district. It could be any subset of the district that isn't predefined. Okay. And the nature of how to define the benefit also seems sort of somewhat flexible, right? One of the examples was inflow to a bypass, something about that. One of the examples, the PACE project, was very individualized to repayment of the benefit that goes to an individual. So that's also something, that's not predefined as acres or property value or.
Correct.
And it can be even to the point of voluntary for somebody like the PACE program. Okay, so it seems like part of the use case for this, if there is one, would be a more flexible and different way of matching assessments and votes to benefits than we might have through the existing system of local districts that exists. Because the property boundaries aren't right, or several districts in a row want to act together and not go through a LAFCO process to set something up or try to coordinate separately. They might think that's useful. And the people in an area or their local folks in districts could come to SSJDD and say, here's the proposal. This would work better than us doing it ourselves. and figure out how to match the benefits to the assessment and the votes.
Yes, there is there's more flexibility that the state would have under the SSJDD authority for that defining of special benefit. Prop 218 for local districts is very specific. Prop 13 has sort of a looser threshold for defining the beneficiaries, and so there's that flexibility as well.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding at least those basic parts of it well enough. Second one, and then I'll stop and go to others, is on the 2/3 vote. I got a little bit lost as we were explaining why that exists, and I don't need and how it could be changed. And I don't need that today, but I think I would really appreciate it as part of the report to make sure that that's laid out. Was it originally 50%? Why did it change? Who could change it? And by the way, if anybody is listening, this is not me advocating for changing it. I just want to understand how it works. I think Board Member Bosler, asked legislature. You used the word administrative. Is it the legislature? Is it the district? Is it the voters? What is it that would have to change? And feel free to answer it now if you like, but otherwise, I mainly just care that it be clear in the report.
So we will clarify that in the report. The 2/3 vote requirement, or the 2/3 approval of landowners, is written into the statute now. It was there originally. It's currently there now. It's 2/3 by count or by land, I believe, but it's a 2/3 threshold. Changing that to match the Prop 218 requirements of 50% would be, my understanding would be a legislative change. So there would need to be language drafted to make that change. Likely it wouldn't be a standalone. It may be incorporated into another bill for greater flood control purposes, whatever. But that would be at the legislative level. It would not be a proposition or anything that would go to a vote, to a general vote. But it would definitely come under the scrutiny of various taxpayers.
Right. Yeah, that would make sense, though. If the legislature said it, the legislature could change it. Okay, thank you.
Member Bosler.
Yeah, there's just a lot here, and this is a really big topic. And I think just because it's big and controversial, and certainly landowners, that was a consistent through all of your different iterations that they're concerned, and I get that. I mean, nobody wants to pay higher taxes without a clear benefit to them. But I think first thing is that I think considering this option, it's really about, because right now the system is funded primarily, besides the local assessments and 218 assessments that folks put forward, it's federal funds and then state general funds, right? So this is really a matter of, how much do we think the direct beneficiaries, because I would say the reason why we're all here is because there's a statewide importance of the system, not just for water supply, but also this very large geographic area that was impacted by mining, and then the government came in and wanted to make the land arable and support an agricultural industry as well. So there's a lot of complicated history that makes, is it the responsibility of those living in and around the system to pay for it, or should those costs be borne more broadly by the state of California? So to me, this is a really big question that needs to be explored more clearly. But obviously the work that we're doing month after month here, and listening to people like Dr. Swain and others about the risks to the system, you know, and our need and desire to go more quickly in implementing the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan and the limited resources that we have, I really do think that local property owners should consider this very seriously, not to cover the bill for this at all, but as one component of a multi-funding strategy to help to accelerate the work that we need to do in the system. I think that when I look at our plan, the big gap that I think is going to be the hardest to fill is that O&M ongoing maintenance costs. So that is one where I worry about how we're going to fund that. It's one thing to raise project money and infrastructure money that we need, but it's another thing to have that as ongoing maintenance. And living on the state general fund is challenging, I will say, because there's a lot of demands on that money and it's a very volatile funding source. So I do think the benefits need to be made more clear to the people who would be paying the assessment. And I also hope that in the report, the legal analysis is really clear about what is needed in order to actually implement this as well, because I have a lot of questions right now. This authority predates Prop 13 by a whole, like, many decades. But like lots of things changed with Prop 13 in the 70s. And there's been very little change to a lot of laws around property tax assessments since then that have withstood. So I just think that legal analysis needs to be really clear about this district. I think it's a really unique district in some ways. If we had really strong regional flood management programs where people were really invested in their regional plan, you could see value in people being excited about having some funding source that they're paying for to help support that. I think it's harder. We're just in a deficit because of the way we are organized around maintaining the system, I think, right now. I'm happy to have anyone disagree with me and have discussion so we
Won't
can
come
learn
from
more.
me. I'm happy this is being taped so we can transcribe because I can't make notes fast enough. Member Ramirez, then Member Rego.
Sorry. I'm not going to disagree. I'm going to wholeheartedly echo and suggest that when the report comes, it's put in that context.
Yep.
Most of the report was how it's hard and things that would be challenging and people don't want it for various reasons. But I think this is right in the middle of the inherent tension between the state's role and the local's role. And we committed to doing this study to address the very issue you just flagged about this being a piece of the pie, not the pie. And so hopefully the report provides that and describes things that could be done to fill that piece of the pie out, not just why it would be hard. Because there's a lot of things that could be done. And I think at the very least, we need to daylight those just to make sure that the path is clear because it's a choice and it's a commitment of resources and there aren't many of those in our toolbox. But we still want to just lay out those paths so we can make a conscious decision about whether or not it's worth the investment of time to then get the money. But thank you for saying that.
And thank you as well. And thank you. Member Rego.
Yeah, a couple of questions. On the 218 process, I heard you say something that it could be fixed legislatively. That it doesn't have to go back to before the voters on that?
The legal analysis we had done, the indication was that it's a legislative statute and could be changed by the legislature, would not have to go back and be approved by voters.
Interesting, thank you. And then when this was proposed, this study was in 2019, I just come on the board. So I guess my question is this, had the staff or the board considered, maybe leasing some of this property in order to generate revenue? Is there that possibility? I mean, and I'll give you an example. When Three Rivers bought this, when we bought the land that we did the setback levy on the Feather River. We bought it on behalf of the state, and then we leased it back to the farmers for, rent. And so it created this revenue stream. And, Paul Bruner, advocated for the locals to keep that money in order to do maintenance, for the project. And so the state agreed to that eventually. But the thing is that if there's the ability to lease this and generate revenue in the areas where it's viable, is that something that was considered in regards to trying to raise revenue?
Is done. There are leases that bring revenue. There are actions that are rented that bring revenue of current SSJDD land, which is under the ownership and authority of the board. However, all that revenue is by law put into the state general fund and not for purposes of flood protection or activities or any local entities. So, yeah, we do considerable work. Did I do that right? I'm sorry, Andrea, I was going to have you come up and say that because you're the one that does that. We've done this report. And it's more than 6 figures annually. Sometimes it goes up depending upon what the lease is. And I don't think we have yet received a thank you note from the general fund folks.
President Dolan is correct. Andrea Buckley, Chief of Environmental Services and Land Management, overseeing Sacramento San Joaquin Drainage District real estate interests. Yes, we do have various leases for oil and gas, for agricultural, for apiary, and other various uses, but Ms. Dolan's correct. That goes to the general fund.
So we haven't had figured out a way to get the state to relinquish those dollars to. What is the value of that? I can't imagine.
It does vary based on the royalty amounts, but it can be anywhere from 600,000 up to several million for those revenues.
It's not steady. It does depend on what the activity is. If there's a lease for cattle grazing and there's 2 years of flooding, then that's not going to provide revenue. But yeah, how do we change that? Somebody would have to like us.
Yeah, I mean, we should look into it. I mean, Fish and
Oh, we
Wildlife
have.
also leases, their land. I don't know, it feels like there's probably a topic that other departments in the resources agency that own lands, would be an interesting conversation to figure out how to plow those monies back into the programs.
And I think the default is that it just goes in the general fund. I don't think there's a
Yeah,
special thing that
I
says that
agree.
it has to.
Yeah.
So we could not easily, but we could change the default, which is to direct it someplace
For
where.
example, I don't think the parks concessionaire is, I don't think that goes into the general fund. So, I mean, state parks. So I don't know. We should just look into it.
It's my memory, which
Chris might know a
I'm going
lot
to say
about
is
this, actually.
solid, is that it's not up to us to change where it goes.
So,
Or we would have.
just
believe me, we would have.
Chris Leaf,
All
Executive
right, we got
Officer.
2 DOF alumni here, so they'll tell us how to do it.
So on the level of revenues, so the lease fees and oil and gas royalties, as noted, are deposited to the general fund. Over the last 4 years, lease fees have varied between $339,000 and $640,000, and oil and gas royalties have varied between $29,000 and $162,000. So it's a fairly modest amount.
Still could be useful.
Yes.
It could be useful, and it also could encourage more active thoughts about this.
Yeah.
I wonder if we should be doing oil and gas leases.
We could always do solar arrays.
Yeah, not that one.
I like the bees. Yes. Well, it might be something for us to actively consider to generate support from locals for added revenue. Good ideas all around. Everyone has some kind of complication to it. Megan Nagy, did you want to add something?
Please.
Be happy to have you. I assume you're part of the stakeholder group that's been communicated. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon now. Megan Nagy, Deputy Manager for RD 108 and the lead for the Mid-Upper Sac River region. We did meet with the team. It feels like it's over a year ago. I don't remember how long now. I appreciate Member Bosler's comments. We did have concerns regarding the way the benefits were determined. They were very neighborhood local driven and not broad. And we felt like that had a lot of inequity. As they mentioned, there's a lot of levies that are 8361. Those, obviously the benefits are spread across the whole state for that, yet the pieces that are in the bypasses, those benefits were only the neighbors. And so you've got folks across the river that weren't paying any benefit directly, and then on the other side of the river, we're assuming all of the benefits and paying it. And so we had a lot of concerns about how that was determined, and I know that our landowners would absolutely not be supportive of the way that that was determined. On the maintenance area front, it's a really interesting way to get around the problem that DWR has as far as financing and having to spend one-year money. I do agree that if it's going to be used for a capital project, that should come from the community, right? The community needs to want the project. But that's good. That's all available within that authority. And I think we would still have the challenge of whether DWR would be willing to take on that kind of a project. But that's a really interesting opportunity. And as Scott said, that's something that was the original intent of the SSJDD assessment to begin with. So I think there's some good and bad, and looking forward to seeing how our comments were addressed that we provided the team previously.
So are we. We have one hand up. I just want to stress this is information at this point. So I'm going to Ms. Jardin. You can offer some comments. But I would ask you to be brief, okay? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, California Water Research was one of the few organizations that supported the $1 billion in the Senate climate budget for dam safety and flood risk reduction. And we're now working with a statewide network of climate advocacy groups. And flooding is one of the biggest concerns for climate adaptation. So we are advocating, there is a climate adaptation bond. We are advocating for greatly increased investment in flood risk reduction. And we'd also like to see stakeholder, local community engagement around community emergency response, around key climate hazards. And for a lot of communities, flooding is the top one. And that's also a way to educate the community and build support for flood risk reduction. So that's something that is new, but it's also the studies have shown that people do better if they do have to evacuate, if they have support of other community members. So it's a way of building more resilient communities, as well as getting support for the kinds of local measures, such as this support for this tax measure that might be needed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try to draw this to a close now that we spent more than an hour on it, but I will never tell a board member not to talk. Member Bosler.
I just have one more request for the final report, and I don't know if it's been part of the scope, but there's a lot to me of overlap in two different policies that we're talking. We've got the San Joaquin Drainage District assessment. Sacramento, San Joaquin. And then we also have a lot of discussions in California about a flood insurance requirement or a state flood insurance program. I really think that there would be a lot of policy benefit to discuss how those two things could interact or overlap, because to me, they seem like they're trying, in some ways, getting at sort of the same issue, but in a different way. But I think that would be a helpful paragraph or two to add.
Okay. I see someone actually writing that down, and we actually have it on the tape as well, so it'll be transcribed. But thank you for that. Board members? Okay. No one else at this point.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Darling, got a conclusion? Is your conclusion, thank you?
Yes, that is my conclusion. We'll see you in the future on the same topic.
Oh, well, our conclusion is, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Whew. Some things to think about, something to read. Okay, I did not anticipate that one taking that long, so that's my failing looking at this. But it's going to return, so we'll make sure it's on an agenda that we create some room. I'm going to proceed here with Annalise Calisco giving us information on the PL 8499 rehabilitation assistance, now open, not waiting. You know, some folks finally got the 2017 this year, but we're going to be making movement, right?
Yes.
Sorry to say good afternoon, but welcome.
Yes. So I will have to change my script slightly. Good afternoon, President Dolan, members of the board. Angeles Calisto, Enforcement Section Chief for the board. And I'm here to give you that update regarding the 2023 activities related to the Public Law 8499 rehabilitation assistance. I do want to make a note that a couple other folks are online and that could be available for any questions that you may have. So Mr. Jonathan Yao, he's the chief with the Readiness Branch with the Army Corps of Engineers, Sacramento District, is attending online. And so we also have Mr. Dave Wilden with the Department of Water Resources, who leads the state's storm damage repair program. Trying to get this thing to work. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. Okay, so under Public Law 8499, the Corps has the authority to provide rehabilitation assistance to federally authorized projects and those that have been damaged through a recent flood or storm event. The eligibility for rehabilitation under this program is either obtained by either receiving a minimally acceptable ratings through a Corps inspection or by having an approved letter of intent. So the system regains eligibility under the Corps' System-Wide Improvement Framework Policy, the SWIFT, and the first step in that is obtaining and submitting a letter of intent. Once that letter of intent has been approved by headquarters, then at that point the system becomes eligible. So as you know, yes.
What about the letters being at headquarters and the period is now open for things and it hasn't been approved yet? If it's approved later, can those then apply?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Jonathan Yao from the chief with the Army Corps. I think we've posed the question to them before, and I would defer and see if he could address that question for you, Mr.
On the board's behalf and the organization's behalf, we prepared a letter to headquarters of the Army Corps that if all the steps had been done except for the headquarters approval for LOI, that they'd be eligible. We're just trying. So I'm actually not sure why something would take a year at the federal government, but it happens at our level, so I guess it happens at theirs.
Yes, good afternoon, President Dolan and all. This is Jonathan Yao. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers, Sacramento District. And so to address the delays in these processes and procedures over the last, 5 years or so, we've been going through various different wildfires and COVID and staffing turnover. So unfortunately, a lot of this review process gets put on hold because of other urgent needs. Our emergency management program really covers much more than the recovery phase of a disaster. We also touch on preparedness, response, advanced measures, and various other program activities as well, all throughout the disaster life cycle. So unfortunately, a lot of times we just don't have the staffing that gives it the attention that it deserves. So we're constantly working to rectify that. But yeah, so we're at this point, we have, I think we had 15 LOIs that were pending review. As of today, all of these LOIs have been forwarded to our division for review, and I believe 7 have already been approved by headquarters. There's 1 currently being reviewed at our division, South Pacific Division, and then we have another 6 that are currently with headquarters. So pending the approval of those 6, I think those are really the only outstanding ones we have. So we've made a lot of headway into these LOIs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yao. This is President Dolan. If I made any statement that was translated to our dismay in our partnership with you, or understanding the effort that is needed, I apologize. I certainly know that we're not alone in your attention, and we've been following how you have been headquarters and the district level really has been assisting in moving these LOIs forward. So that's greatly appreciated. But, understand, I'm always going to say do it now because that's just how I act, but it doesn't mean that I don't understand all the complications that occur. So thank you for the input.
Absolutely, ma'am.
The question was, if these items that are headquarters get approved, will the areas that were damaged during this event be eligible for PL 8499 since they occurred prior to the approval of the LOI? That's my question.
So the answer to that question will be, we'll have to take a look at them on a case-by-case basis. According to the policy, they would not be eligible for rehab. However, we understand there may be some nuances that we could work with. I can't promise anything at this point, but we will definitely take a look at them on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. Annalise, you got some more slides there?
I do, I certainly do. And maybe this one will cover one of the concerns that board member Countryman brought up here. So let me see, where did I leave off? I'm trying to get back to my, okay. So the, this year is no surprise to the board, but the state of California experienced a series of atmospheric rivers, and bringing that brought up quite a bit of rain, and obviously some significant and historic snowpack on the Sierras. So as a result of that, the Corps decided to do the rehabilitation assistance, breaking it up by basin. In the past, it was done by county base, and in a previous year, it was done sort of statewide. So this time the approach was slightly different. So for the Sacramento River Basin, which was the first time that the Corps, this year, that the Corps officially opened the rehabilitation assistance, that occurred on June 16th. And at that point, the noticing period remains open for 30 days for requests to be submitted. And so again, so the eligibility for assistance when that noticing period came about in June was only for systems that were within the Sacramento River Basin. The notices and the requests were due to the Corps, and they were actually submitted on July 16th. And that included a total of 76 sites that were submitted by a total of 16 different local maintaining agencies or areas. The most of the damages that were submitted by our local partners were, damages that included like wave wash, seepage, boils, erosion, slips, some sloughing on the levees. And I'll have some photos that kind of show and speak to that, those damages, so you can kind of get a sense for that. There's always a delay. Give me a sec here. I'm trying to get my. Okay, so this table there on the right shows all the different local maintaining agencies that submitted requests for rehabilitation assistance. I think one of the things that you'll notice there is on the under parentheses right next to it, there's at least 3 systems right now that are currently inactive in PL 8499. They have not submitted a letter of intent. There only one system that has submitted a request for rehabilitation is Reclamation District 536, and they do have a pending letter of intent at this point. Okay. Mhm. Where do I point? Give me a second. Okay. And I'm sorry, it's much more legible in an electronic version. And we can provide that again, printed in a larger size. Maybe the default was smaller. Okay, so these are some of the photos that kind of show, again, these photos, I took them off of the various requests that were submitted. I know they're all kind of smushed together here in one photo, but I took the ones that really were easier to distinguish in a screen, right? So a lot of times some of the damage is harder to visualize in a photo when you're out in the field. So hopefully this kind of gives you a sense for some of the different damages that were experienced and that were submitted for request and that will be evaluated. Again, that's only for the Sacramento River Basin at this point. And as President Dolan at the beginning of the meeting announced, so the San Joaquin River Basin and the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta is the next basin that has been open for rehabilitation assistance. So that occurred on July 19th, so just about a week and a couple days ago. The notice was issued by the Army Corps of Engineers for that system. And right now we've sent out those notices to all the local districts and LMAs to begin their site assessments and start submitting those requests. We are asking for submissions of requests to be submitted to the board by the 16th of August. So there's a couple, maybe 2.5 weeks or so left for those submissions to occur. And I'll be the point of contact for those. We've also posted this information on the board's website under the homepage, under public notices. So the letter that was sent to the local districts, the notice from the Army Corps of Engineers, and the contact information is also available there. So I did want to point that when the Sacramento River Basin noticing period was open, we did actually get a few requests from San Joaquin River systems. And we, out of courtesy and just transparency, we did send those to the Corps. We know that those were not going to be considered at that time, but we do plan to submit those here in by August officially, right, as part of the additional requests that we anticipate coming down the pipeline. So for that, there were actually 14 sites that were submitted by 2 different LMAs. One is being San Joaquin County Flood Control Agency, and the other one is the Lower San Joaquin Levee District. So what are the next steps in this process? So once the noticing period, the 30-day noticing period ends, which would happen here for the San Joaquin Basin at the middle of August, the Corps will then begin reviewing those requests and determining which systems are active or inactive in PL 8499, which goes to board member Countryman's question there. At that point, those systems that are deemed active and eligible for rehabilitation, then the Sacramento District will seek funding from headquarters to initiate and do their field inspections to verify the conditions and the damages. At that point, if the site is qualified, then a project inspection report is prepared by the Sacramento District team. It essentially evaluates the damage and the different alternatives, benefit cost ratio and the like. So the next bullet point there, so essentially, is if the site and the damage does have a benefit to cost ratio that is greater than 1, and it also, the cost of the repair is greater than 15,000, then it goes to the division for approval. Once that approval is received, then the Corps begins working on the next steps, which are the contracting, real estate, access agreements and the like, and obviously the design plans for the repairs. And it's at that point that the board begins the discussions and also is responsible for the LERTs, what we call the LERTs costs, the lands, easements, right-of-way, relocation, disposal. So if there's any utilities that need to be relocated, if there's any access issues, additional right-of-way that needs to be acquired and the like, those will all be undertaken and absorbed by the board as a non-FED sponsor. Yes.
Madam President. On the previous slide, I think it said Lower San Joaquin Levy District.
Yes.
Is that the Upper San Joaquin? You know what I'm saying? Is that above the project levies? Or is that?
I believe this one is in the lower part. So the reach of where the, I believe is in the bypass, and I'm going off of memory, but when we looked at this one, the site appeared to be within an area that is covered by Madera County, a letter of intent that was submitted to the Corps.
That's right.
Yes, so we believe that it might, it will be eligible, but it was probably done in coordination by the Lower San Joaquin Levy District with Madera County for the submission of that request.
Just for.
I'm looking at Shane Schwartz, who might have some clarity on this.
He's here, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Shane Swartz, Levy District. So that reach, you're correct. So it is not part of the PL 8499 program. So that is the state-owned levies. So I see it on here as kind of a outlier to this list. Talking with board staff as well. I want to talk with Dave Whelan about further steps to get that site repaired, but it's not part of the Madera LOI as well.
That was my question.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
okay. Thank you.
Glad you made it today. You would have communicated anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for that clarification. We were looking at a different request, and I think I got it confused, so I apologize for that confusion.
Every time the term Lower San Joaquin comes up, someone says, where is that?
Okay, so what I had at the next slide, I'm pretty much done at this point with my presentation. So what this is just a recap. So this is the flow chart that was part of your package, but essentially just kind of shows the process where that shaded area is currently where we are. It's the submission of those requests. And then we kind of just provided that for guidance and so for awareness of the process that it's bound to take. There are no timelines established there, but hopefully that gives you a general sense for the process. And we'll be working very closely with our partners and the Army Corps of Engineers to seek, timely execution of the sites and the requests so that they're done in a timely manner. So we'll do the best that we can to try to expedite them as much as possible on our end, and then assist our partners to proceed with those quickly. So with that, I will, that ends my presentation, Ms. Dolan.
Thank you for bringing this forward. Thank you for paying attention to this. And we are aware that you don't just try to do your best, you do, because you put this notice out, which thank you for doing that. I'm hoping we can post the information from the PowerPoint on our website and maybe send it out as well. Sure. Taking care of business, as you are. All right, any final questions? I was going to call on Shane Schwartz because I couldn't see you, but now I can see you. Megan Nagy. You are to be in the front row from here on out.
I was hiding behind Michael Wright. Megan Nagy, Deputy Manager, RD 108, Sac River West Side Levee District, and Nice Landing Ridge Drainage District. Of course, I can't come to a board meeting with PL 8499 as a subject without getting up and talking. So this week I had the opportunity to be on a panel at the NAFSMA conference regarding recovery from storm events. I was on the panel with Mr. Steve Hill, the Director of Homeland Security for the Corps of Engineers. We had, believe it or not, they asked me to be honest. They were
As if
brave
you
souls.
could be anything less.
I didn't get kicked out. But during that panel, Mr. Hill stressed the importance of relationships and stressed the importance of continued engagement at all times. So as we've seen in the past, when we don't engage, we don't get a lot of action. And so I'm here, please, I think leadership at the Sacramento district level needs to be engaged to make sure that they understand the importance related here. In RD 108 alone, the 4 damage sites, 2 from 2019, 2 from 2023, all within a 3-mile range. Depending on how those evolve over the year, I might not be able to patrol the first 3 miles of levee because of the damage that's there. This is getting to a point of completely unsafe. And so we need to make sure that they understand the importance and the severity of what's out there. And that's just me. You know, Angeles showed 70 plus sites submitted, and that doesn't even count the San Joaquin, which I can't even imagine how many more might get submitted there. Yeah, I know the Sacramento district resources are limited, and things will get pushed aside, but you know, emergency response is the absolute #1 priority. And just a reminder, in 2017, similar sites like this were submitted in about April, and by November, they were completed full construction. So it is possible if there's a commitment. That's it. Thank you.
As always, thank you. But we're always happy to see you. I said front row. Don't have to play. Where is she? Okay. Any other questions? Forgive me for lengthening this one. Thank you very much. Okay. I'm thinking that we're just going. I'm going to just do a little. No, there's no one online. I did look. Thank you for asking. I'm gonna pull a little President Edgar and just proceed. Item 10C, 10D. Very brief, Tulare Basin hydrology flooding. I have been the one to ask Ego Yang to provide this. He's on the operational branch. And you were activated and very much on site and being communicated with through the whole flooding in the lower San Joaquin. So just ask for an update.
Thank you.
It stopped raining.
Yeah.
The problems didn't go away. That's
Yeah.
my update.
Let me just I'll start with thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, President Dolan and members of the board. Again, my name is Igor Liang. I'm the Chief of Operations Branch with the board. Since March this year, the Tulare Basin has drawn extensive attention from the flood communities and beyond, and not only because of the floods and damages to this region by March storms, but also because the region's record-setting snow and snowmelt-driven flood threats for the months to come. You can just go ahead, pull my presentation.
You do have a PowerPoint?
I do, yeah, but
Wow,
this is just
okay.
4 or 5 slides, very quick.
We're having a little technical difficulty here. There it is.
Yeah, we got.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just in my cover page still. So For this reason, I just talk about because of the threat of snow melt-driven flood concern. Since March, the board has included a standing agenda item to receive informational briefing for this topic. So I'm glad that just upfront, I wanted to say the snow melt-driven flood threat is not a big concern anymore, at least for this year. And I'm going to share with you why I say that in this briefing.
Oh, because he is doing it.
Just go straight to the snow accumulation chart that you are all familiar with now. The slide is showing the cumulative kind of daily snowpack water content. If you follow the blue line is for this year, and there's some other selected years. On the blue line, there are a few red circles, which represents the numbers that I referred in the previous informational briefings. So as of July 18, you will see that the remaining snow water content, basically the snowpack, is only 2% of its peak value. Not 2% of average April value, which is translate to actually less than 0.7% of its peak value in early April. So basically, almost all the snow has already melted by this point. This slide just show you the full, they call full natural flow full natural flows, they call FNF. This is based on the DWR CDEC database from that CDEC information. This for the 4 reservoirs we're talking about from the hydrographs top to bottom is the Pine Flat on top, Isabella next, and Terminus, and then Success at the bottom. The Success watershed above that is pretty, in general, is pretty low elevation, and it's also the smallest kind of in terms of area. So it does not, has not generated a lot of runoff, so we can almost ignore the bottom line. So this, the hydrograph is essentially showing the water, snow melt water coming into the reservoir on daily basis. I also placed the peak runoff at March time, the March for the 4 rivers on the up right corner, just for reference. At that time, the March storm generates much bigger runoff comparing to the snow melt. And you will notice that since the last update, which is represented by the green vertical line, there are a couple of maybe what I call ramp ups because of the heat wave. The first is early July. It generates some runoff while they still have snowpack. But the second one in mid-July, you will see the ramp is much lower comparing to previous, and then it's continued to go down. If you recall the last slide, by mid-July, by this time, actually the snow water content is not big enough to generate any big runoff. So that's why I mentioned earlier that the snow melt-driven flood threat is a low concern at this point in time. I say that because we got a lot of water in the reservoir. So if you leave behind a almost near full reservoir, you always have flow threats, flow risk downstream of that area. So that's a different topic. I'm not going to cover, but it's good because by the at the end of flood season, you will have a full, almost full reservoir. You'll see the last column and pretty much almost 90% full for all of them. So the water will be precious for other beneficial use for the rest of the year. Just to summarize, basically the snowpack is very small. It's less than 0.7% of its peak value. And snow melt driven flood risk is very low and not a bigger concern. And also reservoir is full for beneficial use, and the area is right now in flood recovery mode. That will conclude my presentation if there's any question.
Any questions?
Board staff.
We do have one from board staff. And before I call on her, I just wanted to say, because of an estimate that our meeting would end at 1, we have a board member who made a commitment, so Board Member Bosler did leave at 1. So we're sorry for that, but there's no action the rest of the day. So Julian, Nancy Woodward, you're on, because your hand went up. She's unmuted? Okay. Yes, no? Oh, the hand went down? Okay, well, the hand went down, so thank you for that. No questions from board, no questions from audience. Thank you so much for these presentations.
Thank you.
Very helpful to us, very helpful to the public, I believe. And I appreciate your effort on that. Okay, well, there it is. I was trying to find that. Mr. Wright, our chief engineer, you're up for the next agenda item that we always request. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, President Dolan, members of the board. Michael Wright, Chief Engineer for the board. This is item 10E, an update on staff activities related to July and to the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative. My update is basically related to the interagency agreement today, or IAA.
Excuse my sign language.
That's right. I
It
didn't
was
know
not
if
to
you were.
you.
Okay.
Or pertinent to what we're doing.
Okay.
I'll stop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So my update is related to the interagency agreement, or IAA, amongst the board, Caltrans, and CDT. We've basically reached an agreement on what that language is in the agreement, and we're now waiting for Caltrans and CDT to finalize that draft to send it back to the board. Once we receive that, we'll check it out and we'll provide it to DWR's contract services, and they will do a contractual review for on behalf of the board, and they'll also do a legal review. And if they find no significant issues, they'll provide that back to us. And once we receive that buy-off from DWR, we can hopefully begin the signing process, which would be the board, Caltrans, and CDT. Once that's approved by all parties, that allows the program to provide funding to the board so that the board can begin processing those permit applications, the 150 or so permit applications that will come in for the project. We did receive one application so far from Caltrans. We're treating it kind of as a test pilot, but it's basically an application, and it's just one, so there's no issue processing it. But it does somewhat start the process of working with Caltrans on these applications. And that's all I have.
So up to date, Caltrans, Department of Technology, and you and your staff have looked at this agreement and it looks fine.
We've all given it the thumbs up, yes.
Thumbs up, okay. So when it's transmitted to the next levels of review, far be it for me to say there shouldn't be review for accuracy, you are going to transmit it with a thumb up.
Yes.
Should go quickly, I hope.
Hopefully. Right.
Okay. This is going to be great. A lot of rural communities looking for this. And so appreciate your work. Thanks for the report.
Thank you.
Question, board members? Thanks for doing that. Audience? Okay. Did you have a comment, board member Countryman? Okay, that takes care of board items. So who wins the lottery on when the meeting's over, Mr. Wright? Neither one of us. It's not over yet. All right, item 11, are the executive officers report. That's singular, and it should be plural in my opinion. And we have received yesterday the administration, and then with our board packet, operations, flood system improvement, environmental services and land management, flood planning and programs. We've read them. Some of us have actually sent emails with questions, so that's individual, that works. Anyone want to say anything? Board, to my left, to my right, to the room, on there. Thank you all for putting them together. We go quickly at the end of the meeting because we're just, it's the way we are at ends of meetings, but we do appreciate it, and when they're received, we do our homework. Everybody's nodding, yes, we do, okay. Board comments and committee updates. Unfortunately, the coordinating committee was canceled. There are just some folks who were going to present, and then circumstances in their employment came up and they couldn't. So we are going to have one in August. We're anxious to do that. We haven't had one since the storms commenced in December. Any other committee updates? We're looking forward to the designated floodway board committee of the president and board member Ramirez being scheduled soon. As everybody comes back from vacation. I don't know of anything else. Okay. Upcoming board meetings. We have board workshop on August 11th, and it will be here, this location, SACOG. Coordinating committee is set for Wednesday, August 23rd, and it is preliminarily planned to be virtual, but we'll see if we can find a free spot that's big enough. The next business board meeting is Friday, August 25th, and it will be at the Sacramento City Hall. And then I understand that that will be the occurrence for the fourth Friday meetings the remainder of this year,
That's correct.
with the workshops still being here at SACOG. It's the way all the reservations at various places occurred. So we'll see you on August 11th. Mr. Dew and I we spoke with each other this week, and there is no need for closed session. He doesn't see one, and neither do I, so we're not going to do it. So there's no action report from closed session. Anything for the good of the order. Meeting adjourned.